Chapter 2269. Glorious Divine Realm, 38th Layer, Auspicious Star Heavens. It wasn't easy to ascend from the lower world to the higher world. The weaker one's heavenly wheel and cultivation base were, the more difficult it would be. After all, the heavenly might of each layer was stronger than the one before. However, returning from the higher world to the lower world was simply too easy. The pressure they had to endure would decrease in a straight line, and their body would feel more and more comfortable. In the end, when the auspicious star race's heavenly wheel returned to their tribe, the 38th layer was completely silent. On the ground of the divine realm, heavenly wheels were scattered all over the place. They were huddled together in clusters, the divine intent radiating from their bodies. Dim and weak moans could be heard coming from their mouths. Judging from the situation, it seemed that a group of people had joined forces to launch an attack, but they were defeated by a powerful enemy. At this moment, in front of them, 9 figures were walking side by side. The divine intent radiating from them was especially strong, and their bodies seemed to be covered in a layer of divine radiance. They ignored the auspicious star race's heavenly wheel, who had returned to his tribe and was currently in a daze. They directly walked past him and soared into the sky. 9 rays of light followed the vast heavenly light and rushed towards the 39th layer. When they left, Heaven Doe turned back and glanced at the 7 divine veins surrounding the damaged heavenly wheel. He faintly curled his lips and said, 70,000 years of cultivation base of a saint. Why is one missing? It should be an elder from the 38th layer. He should have gone to the higher world to ask for reinforcement, Vivian said as she glanced at Qin Hao. The successive defeats in the lower world would definitely attract the attention of the various divine races. Perhaps at this moment, the news of them breaking through the 38th layer had already spread to the ears of the upper 9 heavens, and even the moon flow race of the 97th layer. In that case, would the upper 9 heavens send a perfect heavenly wheel to stop them? What would the moon divine sky think? Qin Hao's expression was calm, and he didn't seem to be under any pressure. Since he had come this time, no matter what kind of dragon's pool or tiger's den was ahead, he would definitely charge through it. Whether the moon divine sky sent people to stop them or not, the result would be the same. In any case, he would have to face it sooner or later. Passing through the majestic skylight, everyone entered the 39th level. As Qin Hao looked down at the vast continent, his voice, which was filled with divine power, swept out in all directions, rushing toward the place where the 39 divine wills were the most concentrated and strongest. He shouted, "This humble one is Qin Hao, and I have come specially to pay a visit to the great elder of the 97th layer of the Moonflow clan. I hope that the 39 divine masters will let me pass." "Go ahead." A slightly dignified voice came from the divine region, where the divine will was the most concentrated. Not a single heavenly Luan expert appeared, and the divine master guarding the 39th layer did not send anyone to stop them. They were allowed to pass directly. This surprised Qin Hao and the others. They nodded. Qin Hao surged with divine light and ascended again with everyone, following the 39th layer of heaven to the 40th layer. "Divine Lord, are we really not going to stop them?" At this time, in the most majestic temple in the God domain, the core members of the 39 God clan clenched their fists, their faces full of humiliation as they looked at the patriarch sitting on the main seat. "Stop." The patriarch was thin, and the aura of the divine will he exuded was not very stable. Something must have happened to his cultivation recently. Not to mention that he was not in good condition, even if he was at his peak. What could he use to stop 9 perfect heavenly Luan experts? Even a divine master like him could not stop them, and no one else in the clan was a match for Qin Hao. Instead of being beaten to the ground like the other Protoss, it would be better to let Qin Hao pass. Even if the 9 heavy sins were to be punished, he would have sufficient reason to do so because he would not be able to stop them. "We have forced our way through, and it seems that we have aroused the fear of the various god clans in the heavy glory divine region, Lu said with a smile. This is good, it saves effort. Zhan Wu's expression did not relax at all. As the heavenly might increased, his expression became more serious, because with every step they took, they were closer to the upper 9 heavens. For this trip, Zhan Wu's goal had always been to defeat the strongest heavens prides of the 9 clans. He had never thought that he would be defeated midway, because it was impossible, and he would not allow it. It is not difficult for us to pass through the lower world. The gods of the various clans are weak, and even the divine masters can't win. However, it will not be so easy to go up. Everyone, don't be careless, Qin Hao reminded everyone. He could tell that the divine masters guarding the various heavens would not take action. Firstly, the divine masters were of noble status. If they won, it would be an unfair victory, and if they lost to them, it would be even more embarrassing. In this way, it would provide some convenience for Qin Hao. The 40th heavens. The 40th heavens and the 89th heavens belonged to the entire middle world of the heavy glory divine region. Qin Hao and the others stepped into this place, indicating that the following battle would not be as easy as before. It was still the same as before. Qin Hao faced the 40th heavens and shouted. After his shout, numerous figures appeared in front of him, and all of them were shining with light. In their eyes, the whole world turned into a dazzling sea of divine light. I am Qin Hao, and I am here to visit the great elder of the Moonflow clan. I hope that the 40th heavens can accommodate us, Qin Hao said. I heard you. You have caused quite a commotion in the lower 30 heavens. It is indeed impressive to be able to step into this place, but this is the end. Buzz. The light of a burly man's will started to spin, and the divine light shone brightly. Above his body, a huge shadow of a god appeared. It looked impressive and majestic. Celestial grade. Lu was slightly surprised. They had fought all the way to the 40th heavens, and now, a celestial grade heavenly wheel finally appeared in front of them. 60,000 years of cultivation. Vivian looked to the sides. Who would go? Whoosh. A divine spear shot out from among the 9 people. Tiando was the first to attack. He had once been the first divine general of the Daqin Empire and the Qin Imperial City. Now that he had become a god, the spear in his hand was even sharper with the support of the perfect heavenly wheel. How dare you! The burly man let out a cry and opened his eyes. He raised his hand and pressed down. Dazzling light intertwined on his huge god shadow. The shadow also slapped out a palm, pressing down on the divine spear that Celestial Doe had thrown out. However, the moment they came into contact, the divine palm collapsed. With a loud rumble, the sharp divine spear pierced through the raging law particles and pierced through the chest of the shadow. Blood spurted out as the burly man opened his mouth. He raised his hand to cover his chest. He felt as if the spear had pierced through his body. His entire godly spirit became icy cold. This was the power of the perfect heavenly wheel. Even if it was weaker than his by 2 holy pulses, the 40,000-year-old perfect heavenly wheel still crushed the 60,000-year-old celestial grade. You sound like a bluff. As for your ability, you seem to be no different from those below the 30th layer. Tiando's casual words made the burly man so angry that he almost vomited blood again. His expression was ugly as he let out a deep and helpless sigh. He waved at Qin Hao and said, "You have passed. 1 strike was enough." "Thank you." Qin Hao cupped his hands. Everyone had a tacit understanding. Divine light burst from their bodies and turned into 9 balls of light that rose rapidly, heading toward the 41st layer. Upper 9 layers, 97th layer Yuelu clan's dojo. Just as Qin Hao led his people into the middle realm and broke through the 40 god clans guarding the middle realm, the war of the Tao of the 9 clans was still going on. In the dojo, Yu Qian and Xiao Lei were fighting fiercely. The violent lightning turned into a lightning pool in the dojo. However, the ancient pine tree in the pool stood tall. As the young master of the 91st layer, Yu Qian's ability was on par with Xiao Lei's even though they were in the 92nd layer. Neither of them was weaker than the other. This battle lasted for a long time. In the end, Yu Qian used the ancient pine tree to suppress Xiao Lei, just like how he suppressed Yu Wutian and Yu Han. Xiao Lei could not get up. The ancient pine tree's old roots were like giant hands pressing down on Xiao Lei's burly body. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not break free. "I lost," Xiao Lei said sadly. Xiao Lei said sorrowfully. The divine light on his body had completely dissipated, and he had exhausted all of his divine power. The hammer in his hand had also fallen far away. His seemingly incomparably sturdy purple skin was riddled with eye-catching bloodstains, and the pine roots were about to sink into his flesh. Phew! Yu Qian exhaled heavily. His clothes were already soaked in sweat. When he heard Xiao Lei admit defeat, he, who was about to collapse, immediately put away his life spirit, the ancient pine tree, and the light of the wheel returned to his body. It was not easy for him to win this battle. If Xiao Lei had struggled a little longer, Yu Qian felt that the pine tree's roots would have been broken. If that had happened, he would have been the one to lose. This battle was extremely difficult. "I won by luck." Yu Qian bent down weakly and stumbled to Xiao Lei's side. He pulled the exhausted Xiao Lei up and looked up at the 93rd layer of Chun Wu heaven. Helplessly, Yu Qian withdrew his gaze. It was already difficult to defeat Xiao Lei. Even if he had won, it was impossible for him to defeat Chun Wu heaven now. "Congratulations!" Xiao Lei picked up the divine hammer next to him. He looked disappointed, but he did not hold a grudge. He was indeed one step behind Yu Qian. "You are also very powerful. The great path thunder body of the Xiaowu God clan is indeed shocking. No one in the world can break it. I exhausted all my divine power and could only trap you," Yu Qian said helplessly. His eyes were full of encouragement. Even if Xiao Lei lost, he had received sufficient recognition. "Both of you performed well, but there can only be one winner. Congratulations to the 91st layer, Yu Wu Heaven, for winning." The second elder of Moon Flow stuffed a goose leg in his mouth. His beard was greasy from eating. The elders of the 9 clans nodded. As they discussed, they praised Yu Qian and Xiao Lei's performance. Unfortunately, as the second elder of Moon Flow clan said, there could only be one winner. The 91st layer Yu Qian actually defeated the 92nd layer young master. 2 wins in 2 battles. This was indeed admirable. Apart from being gratified, the elders of the various clans could not help but worry for the Xiaowu clan. They saw the rise of the Youwu clan from the younger generation. If this continued, it was very likely that the Youwu clan would replace the 92nd layer. At this moment, God Lord Xiaowu also had a trace of worry on his face. This Yu Qian is not bad. His use of divine techniques is very skillful, and he has a lot of personal experience. Yu Yuanyu praised Yu Qian as he admired the law battle. Xiao Han also saw this battle and silently nodded in agreement. Yu Qian could be considered a rare talent of the divine Tao among the upper 9 clans. It was precisely because of this that she became even more nervous. If Qin Hao charged in, then Yu Qian would become an enemy in front of Qin Hao. This kind of opponent was both amazing and terrifying. "Continue," Yu Shintian said, his expression still unchanged. "Next, who among the upper 9 clans will challenge who?" God Lord Zhonghua asked with a smile. Yu Qian had used up a lot of his divine power and could not continue fighting. "I, Chun Wu Heaven, challenge, report." A panicked shout broke the atmosphere of the law battle. Then, a Tianluan from the lower world charged in. Just like the Tianluan from the auspicious Star Clan, he fell to the ground in a sorry state. "What is it?" God Lord Zhonghua's face slightly tensed, and Yu Shintian also frowned. Through the divine intent, They could naturally tell that this person who had barged into the law tournament belonged to the god race of the 9 races of the lower world. According to the rules, they should not have appeared here. Reporting to the god lords, a disaster has occurred. A fellow called Qin Hao has come from the lower world. He claims to be visiting the Moonflow clan's divine celestial venerable. He does not have the divine celestial venerable's travel book, nor does he have any token. He forced his way here and fought his way to the 54th heaven. This lowly god is a member of the Jade Wave clan of the 55th heaven, and I specially request the god lords of the upper 9 clans to send a perfect Tianluan to suppress this madman, the newcomer complained tearfully. He had clearly seen the battle of the 54th heaven through the light. The people brought by Qin Hao were unstoppable, and the 55th heaven was no match for them. Hearing this, the upper echelons of the upper 9 clans were shocked. So fast? He reached the 54th heaven in the blink of an eye. Yu Yuanyu's eyes flashed with excitement. This son-in-law of hers was truly amazing. Chapter 2270. Before Yugon and Xiao Lei started fighting, the auspicious Star Sky Elder came to report that Qin Hao had reached the 35th layer. And now, Yugon and Xiao Lei had just decided a victor, and they had already reached the 54th heaven. In the training ground, the divine lords of the 9 clans were surprised. This speed was fast. Continue. Yu Shintian glanced at the Jade Wave Elder with a cold expression. The elder of the Bibo clan sighed, bowed to the god lords, and took the initiative to leave the dojo. Yu Shintian's attitude was clear. Today, the Dao battle of the 9 clans was the most important, and he did not care about the lower realm. Looks like this Qin Hao is indeed outstanding in some aspects. I heard that he fought with the divine prince of the Tianzhao divine realm, and the great Dao sword realm used the entire divine realm to protect him. Regardless of success or failure, his courage is commendable. No wonder he dares to come to our heavy splendor divine realm. Sigh, there is no need to care about him. I heard that when he fought with divine prince Junemo, he only had one divine vein. Even if the great Dao sword realm has a perfect heavenly wheel that is close to the divine lord realm as his protector, it is impossible for him to reach the upper 9 layers. In the seats, the elders of the 9 clans were whispering. The protector they were talking about was a martial lord. The heavy splendor divine realm was a divine king-level force, and they did not pay much attention to the small divine realms, especially the upper 9 clans. They had noble blood flowing in their veins, and 90% of them had perfect heavenly wheels. Their innate sense of superiority made them only see forces of the same level. How could they have thought about Qin Hao's good fortune? Even Yu Yuanjin had followed him for 1,000 years before he heard some information from a brothel in the Cloud Pool Divine Realm. After learning about the massacre in the Divine Realm, he finally found Qin Hao's whereabouts. The death of Junemo and the crippling of Tamanaji's cultivation had become a disgrace to the Tianzhao celestial race and the Yunzhe celestial race. The news was sealed by the 2 deity kings, and only their inner circle knew about it. The owner of the brothel was originally from a branch of the Yu family. Because she admired Yu Yuanjin's elegance, something wonderful happened between the two of them. In their infatuation, the woman accidentally let it slip. After that, Yu Yuanjin learned the news and left directly, leaving the beauty secretly sad. Let's continue. Which level of the pure martial sky are you planning to challenge? God Lord Zhonghua's expression was normal, but he had heard the discussions below in detail. I, Chuanwu Sky, challenged the 94th layer of Lesser Harmony Sky. In the training hall, a sturdy man with a rough face and a black beard pointed at Xiao He-Tian's seat. All right, I, Xiao He-Tian, will accept, God Lord Xiao He said solemnly. A moment later, a woman with a bun on her head stood up next to him. This woman's eyes were crystal clear, her brows were moon-white, and her skin was whiter than snow. Her entire body exuded a divine aura. Her steps were light, and her slender figure floated down. As she moved, a halo of light particles appeared behind her, and her temperament became even more holy. In the halo, she was like a goddess who controlled the light. The 94th layer of lesser harmony sky was the Tao of divine light cultivated by the God race. It was a type of light, but it was also different from pure light. "Little sister, I won't go easy." The man saw that the challenger of lesser harmony sky was the daughter of a god lord and couldn't help but laugh. "Four divine veins. Who are you calling little sister? Call me big sister." The woman rebuked. As her hair drifted in the wind, the heavenly wheel of the great Tao bloomed. 5 veins revolved around it, and the light of the wheel was particularly dazzling. "Divine light of lesser harmony hurts my eyes." The man's divine intent flowed through his body, and his eyes gradually turned golden. It took him quite a while to get used to the dazzling wheel light. The man of pure harmony sky roared, and a 9-foot-long saber appeared in his hand. The saber was thick and heavy, and its edge was extremely sharp. He gripped the saber with both hands and slashed, creating a crescent moon slash that swept toward the woman. "Go!" The woman raised her slender hands, and her slender fingers formed a dazzling array of seals. The afterimages of her hands were like blooming flowers, extremely beautiful. Strands of light shot out of her heavenly wheel, condensing into 5 divine talismans that fell down at the same time. They were like 4 walls that covered the crescent moon's saber light. The domineering saber light immediately stopped, as if it had fallen into a quagmire. As the divine talismans exploded with divine light, the saber chi collapsed with a boom. "Xiaoya's divine light incantation is getting purer and purer," God Lord Chonghua said with a smile as he looked at God Lord Xiaohe. "Big brother Chonghua praises me too much. I can't let that girl hear this, or else she'll go around showing off again." God Lord Xiaohe shook his head and chuckled, sighing in his heart. He had no sons, only this precious daughter of his. Although he understood why Empyrean Divine held the Tao battle of the 9 clans, the Xiaohe clan couldn't be absent because of this. Even if they couldn't marry Xiaohan, they could still become sisters. If only Xiaoya were a man. Thinking this, God Lord Xiaohe also looked at the battlefield, carefully observing the battle between the two. This Tao battle of the 9 clans was of great significance to the descendants of the various god lords. Not only would it increase their combat experience, but it would also allow them to understand their own strengths and weaknesses, as well as which aspect of cultivation they should focus on in the future. He saw the pure harmony sky man and the Xiaohe heaven god lord's daughter exchange blows. As they clashed, they fell into a frenzy, their battle becoming extremely violent. The large man's divine bloodline was weaker than his opponent's by a single mark, but this single bloodline wasn't enough to cause an imbalance between the 2 perfect heaven wheel masters. In comparison, the Xiaohe clan held a slight advantage. Just like before, the pure harmony sky man was skilled in physical combat. He wielded a 9-foot-long divine saber that was incomparably tyrannical and unstoppable. As for the Xiaohe clan's god lord's daughter, her techniques were similar to Yugen's. She was proficient in divine arts, but the difference was that Xiaoya was calmer and more experienced than Yugen. When she saw an opportunity, her divine talisman attacks were like a storm. As the god lords of the 9 clans watched, they would shake their heads and chuckle from time to time. Who would have thought that such a beautiful girl would be so bold and unrestrained? Her repeated attacks caused the pure harmony sky man to complain incessantly. Only Yu Yuanyu found Xiaoya's style to be quite interesting and appreciative. Suddenly, a beam of divine light pierced through the lower realms, falling straight towards the Tao field. It turned into a distressed figure that rushed into the battle, nearly being struck by Xiaoya's divine talisman and the large man's saber light. "What is it now?" God Lord Zhonghua frowned. He waved his hand, indicating for Xiaoya and the pure harmony sky man to pause. Reporting to God Lord Zhonghua, fellow god lords and elders, a madman called Qin Hao has arrived in the lower realms. I know. Speak, what level is he at? Moon Shantian was impatient. He had carefully planned this Tao war between the 9 clans, but now it was being disrupted again and again. This was truly disappointing. Reporting to Empyrean Divine, he has reached the 66th level and is no longer a match for him. I ask that the 9 clans quickly send out perfect heavenly wheels to stop him. The intruder implored. In front of him was the auspicious Star Clan and behind him was the Blue Wave Clan. He believed that the God Lords present already knew of this matter, but they simply didn't care. Now, Qin Hao and his accompanying heavenly wheels had swept through the 9 clans and reached the 66th level. Their momentum was fierce and they couldn't be underestimated. 66th level. God Lord Zhonghua revealed a solemn expression as he looked towards Moon Shantian. Moon Shantian's 2 white eyebrows twisted together. His expression changed several times as he fell into deep thought. From the 55th level to the 66th level, there is an entire 11 heavens between them. Is his momentum so fierce? It looks like we need to be a bit more cautious. The elders of the 9 clans whispered to each other. Qin Hao's barrage of attacks had surpassed the expectations of the 9 clans. They originally didn't care too much about this, but now they felt a knot twist in their hearts, making them feel a bit unhappy. This brat is too savage. Does he think that my Zhonghua divine realm has no one? I will go and meet him and have him know that the dignity of the 9 clans cannot be trampled upon. At the 90th level, Yu Wutian, Yuhan who had been defeated by Yugon stood up, anger on his face. Big brother, don't go. There is no need for you to appear. It's only the 66th level, far from us 9 heavens. If you go now, wouldn't you be giving him face? He might even be proud of it. Beside Yuhan, a 13 to 14-year-old narrow-eyed girl reached out and pulled him back to his seat. As a member of the god race, her appearance couldn't represent her age. In truth, this narrow-eyed girl was over 20,000 years old and had 3 divine veins. It was just that she had been raised as a celestial daughter and lived high above the divine world. Her temperament was childish, and compared to the children of the lower realms, there was no difference between 20,000 years old and a teenager. Right. Little sister is right. I cannot go down. Yuhan nodded again and again. He picked up a sweet fruit and tossed it into the narrow-eyed girl's mouth, causing her to hug Yuhan's arm and act like a spoiled child. Shantian, what do you think? After a long time, God Lord Moonflow asked. The 66th level was one of the upper realms of the middle realms. Qin Hao had swept through all of them in such a domineering manner that they could no longer tolerate him. Isn't there still 23 heavens before the upper 9 levels? Moon Shantian turned to look at God Lord Moonflow. Why was he making such a fuss about nothing? What Empyrean Divine says is correct. If the upper 9 clans were to directly send people down, then what use would there be in keeping these 23 heavenly layers? Of the upper 9 clans, an elder with a strong divine will solemnly said, "Brothers, don't worry. The 87th heavenly layer will be guarded by my son. That bastard Qin Hao definitely won't be able to pass through." A graceful divine master was drinking immortal wine and smiling faintly. It was the 87th level divine master. The law tournament of the 9 clans was not limited to just the 9 clans. There were also a few divine masters in the 80th tier who had come to participate, serving as foils for the 9 clans. Yes. God Lord Zhonghua nodded, understanding the will of the upper 9 races. He waved his hand and said, "You may leave. There is no need to report back." The 66 divinity race elders were stunned. They lowered their heads heavily, bowed, and left the 9 clans' Tao temple in desolation. Chuanwu Sky and Xiaohe Sky, continue, Yu Shantian said with a cold expression. The large man from Chuanwu Sky and the daughter of Xiaohe Sky's divine master looked at each other. In that moment, divine light erupted from their heavenly wheels. Saber light flew through the air and divine runes fell from the heavens. At this time, in a seat to the left of Yu Shintian, Yu Yuanjin was using his luxurious clothes to wipe the divine dates in his hands as he inwardly chuckled. The 66th heavenly layer? They couldn't even last a single exchange? It seemed that Qin Hao's group was a bit stronger than he had imagined. Uncle, don't laugh. I'm very worried right now. Xiao Han rubbed the corners of her clothes. The closer Qin Hao got to her, the tighter her heartstrings became. Although the battle below was exciting and fierce, she had no interest in watching it. Chapter 2271. The battle continued for several dozen rounds, going from violent to stalemate to gradually gaining the upper hand. Xiaoya, the goddess of the Xiaohe race, had one more meridian of cultivation than her opponent, and in the end, she defeated the man at pure martial heaven. The Dao Plaza was instantly filled with enthusiastic cheers. After this battle, from the 90th to the 94th layers of the Zenith Divine Realm, the 5 races had fought 3 times, and only 2 victors had emerged. They were the 91st layer, Yugon, and 4 meridians of the Heavenly Wheel, and the 94th layer, Xiaoya, and 5 meridians of the Heavenly Wheel. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Marvelous. The glory of our 9 races can be said to be continued. The elders watched with relish, stroking their beards in gratification as they nodded. Whether it was the victor or the loser, this Dao Plaza displayed the glory of the 9 races. Continue. Yu Shintian's inflexible face still did not show the slightest ripple of emotion. His solemn expression gave off a strange feeling of indifference and apathy. Which race will be the next to issue the challenge? God Lord Zhonghua swept his gaze over the elites of the 9 races. My 95th layer, Righteous Harmony Heaven, challenges the 96th layer, Supreme Harmony Heaven. A handsome youth holding an astrolabe stood up and said, Righteous Harmony, Perfect Heavenly Wheel, and 5 meridians of the Divine Pattern. Reporting, this lowly god of the 87th layer, Withering Glory Heaven, Ku Baitsu of the Withering Race, requests an audience with the god lords of the upper 9 heavens. The situation is not good. The Heavenly Wheel cultivator Qin Hao has charged straight into our 87th layer from the lower world. Our entire race is no match for him, and our young clan leader has fainted from anger. We can't stop him. Panicked cries of pain rang out. Before he had even arrived, his cries had already reached the hearts of the upper echelons of the upper 9 races through the light of the heavenly Tao world. As they watched this figure descend from the distance, the 9 races were all shaken, and they all stood up from their seats. How could this be? A god lord paled. This was the patriarch of the 87th layer, the Withering Glory god race. Not long ago, he had boasted that his son would guard the 87th layer and that no one would be able to get past him. But now, patriarch, that group of people were all perfect, and their god force was rare. Qin Hao didn't even make a move, and the young patriarch was knocked unconscious by a young man who cultivated the Battle God clan's god technique. Ku Baitsu said in humiliation. When God Lord Withered Glory heard this, his mind went blank. His thoughts seemed to freeze, and a look of disbelief remained on his face. Reporting, the 88th level of heaven has been broken. Reporting, the 89th layer has encountered a group of madmen barging in. The young patriarch is currently engaged in a battle with a perfect heavenly wheel that uses a spear. After just 3 exchanges, he is unable to hold on. The situation is critical. I implore the divine masters of the upper 9 layers to quickly send divine generals to help. Buzz. Another 2 spheres of divine light flew over, rising from the lower realm, kneeling at the center of the 9 clans Dao right under everyone's watchful eyes. Before the 88 divine masters could even open their mouths to speak, they heard a puff sound. An immortal jade sprayed out from the 89 divine masters' mouths and landed in front of their seat. At this moment, the entire dojo fell silent. In the silence, a cold wind seemed to sweep past every upper echelon of the 9 clans, causing their hair to stand on end. This was too fast. When the burly man of Chuanwu Heaven fought with Xiao He Heaven's Xiao Ya halfway through, Qin Hao had only reached the 66th layer. In the blink of an eye, he had already reached the 89th layer. The withered glory clan of the 87th layer was unable to stop him. The young patriarch had been knocked unconscious by a single punch. As for the young patriarch of the 89th layer, he had a true perfect heavenly wheel. Even among the younger generation of the upper 9 clans, he had the qualifications to sit on the same level as them. However, Qin Hao himself did not make a move. Instead, a heavenly wheel that used a spear stood beside him and suppressed the young patriarch of the 89th layer in 3 exchanges. Even if he had not yet been defeated, the hearts of the upper echelons of the 9 clans were fiercely clenched. Could it be that they had really underestimated Qin Hao's strength? In the end, under their underestimation, they discovered that the clown had actually become one of the 9 clans. Shame, shame, this is a great shame for my divine recapture realm. Someone charged all the way from the lower realm to the 89th layer in just a few hours. Moreover, the person who charged in does not belong to the faction of a divine king, but a group of heavenly wheels that were pieced together. If this were to spread out, wouldn't my divine recapture realm become the laughingstock of all the divine kings? The elders of the 9 clans were all extremely vexed and could not help but sigh. In addition to their sorrow, there was also a ball of suppressed fire burning in their chest. How could it be so fast? Divine Lord Zhonghua frowned, finding it hard to understand. If the time that Qin Hao had used to reach the 66th layer was considered normal, then the journey from the 66th layer to the 89th layer could be said to have been completed in an instant. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was as if he had entered a realm where no one could stop him. It did not conform to common sense. Replying to Divine Lord Zhonghua, previously, the elders of the various heavens came to report, but they all returned without any achievements. It is precisely because of this that the various clans of the 70 heavens opened their doors and allowed Qin Hao's group to pass through, allowing them to directly reach the 80th layer. The elder of the 89th layer kneeling in the training ground said, because the upper 9 clans did not care, it precisely caused the various clans of the lower realm to deliberately let them go. Stop them? They might not be able to stop them. Since the upper 9 clans did not care, the various heavens of the lower realm might as well directly let Qin Hao up. From the 70th layer to the 89th layer, they had not encountered much resistance. This Divine Lord Zhonghua looked at Divine Lord Yuelu and Yu Shintian. Yu Shintian still had the same expression as before, as if he did not care at all. Instead, it was Divine Lord Yuelu who had a solemn expression and a hint of anger between his brows. If we are beaten to the upper 9 clans just like this, it will be an enormous loss of face for our upper 9 clans, young Lord Qing Chongqing said. They are simply looking down on our divine recapture realm too much. This son requests to go to the 89th layer and fight with the young masters of the 89th layer. We will beat that Qin Hao to his knees and throw him out of the divine recapture realm. Yuhan could no longer bear it and clenched his fists as he pleaded with Divine Lord Yuwu. Divine Lord Yuwu raised his eyes to look at Divine Lord Zhonghua. Seeing Divine Lord Zhonghua nod, he said, Hanago, victory is not an option. This son obeys Lord Father's orders, Yuhan said excitedly. He clenched his fists, and a powerful light seeped out from between his fingers. With a single step, he turned into a beam of light and flew out of the Dao field of the 9 clans, heading down to the lower realm. At this time, the divine lords and elders of the 9 clans had extremely serious expressions. They had stood up but did not sit back down. They were still in shock from seeing Qin Hao reach the 89th layer. Originally, they did not believe that Qin Hao could really reach the 80th layer, so the 9 clans did not think much of it. Only now, with the arrival of the 3 elders of the 80th layer, did the upper echelons of the 9 clans realize the severity of the situation. Qin Hao's strength was far greater than they had imagined. However, now that Divine Son Yuhan had requested to go and join forces with the Divine Son of the 89th layer, they should be able to defeat Qin Hao. Bang! Bang bang bang! Just as the elders of the 9 clans were fantasizing, they suddenly felt the realm light beneath their feet tremble. They heard a series of deafening noises. Then, 9 divine wills passed through the 96th layer and descended upon the 97th layer. Immediately, the elders of the 9 clans furrowed their brows and looked in a certain direction. They could already see 9 streams of light heading towards the training ground. The 97th layer was from the 99th layer to the 97th layer. Because they were participating in the law battle today, all the elites were gathered here, so the clans did not leave much power behind. As for Qin Hao, was he directly stepping into the moonflow sky? Then, this meant that the perfect prodigy of the 89th layer had already been defeated by Qin Hao's subordinate. In an instant, the expressions of the elders of the 9 clans changed, becoming more and more unsightly. Yuhan turned into a beam of divine light and had just left the Dao field when he saw the 9 beams of light heading toward him. He was stunned for a moment, then he shouted in anger, "How dare you!" Buzz! He raised his hand and threw it. Yuhan's heavenly wheel of the great path swept out. Brilliant wheel light snaked around his body and reached all parts of his body. There was not a single blind spot on his body. Surrounded by 4 divine veins, rolling divine power condensed into a golden spear in his palm. It pierced toward the 9 beams of light that were rushing toward him. Along the way, the divine spear grew larger and larger, and the divine light it released became stronger and stronger. It was suffocating and threatening. Buzz! In front of him, a beam of golden wheel light also exploded. It was extremely dazzling, as if his mortal enemy had met his mortal enemy. A golden spear also appeared. It was dazzling and brilliant, and it pierced toward Yuhan's divine spear and collided violently with it. Boom! There was a shocking explosion. The 2 golden divine spears were destroyed at the same time, and divine will particles shot into the sky. When the 2 precepts raged together, they formed a circle of light that swept out. It swept out extremely quickly and immediately rushed toward Yuhan's body. Yuhan groaned and took 2 steps back. His vigorous divine power went straight to the celestial source. The light wave that swept over was mixed with a piercing pain that was rarely seen in the world. His face instantly turned ugly, and the blood in his chest surged. Oh, not bad. The pride of the upper 9 heavens is indeed not comparable to the weaklings of the Zhonghua lower world. The person who attacked was Tian Do, the former number 1 divine general of the Qin imperial city. His most glorious battle record was a draw with Wuk. You are the one who only needed 3 moves to suppress the divine son of the 89th heavens? The figure that rushed over was extremely fast. When Yuhan took 2 steps back, Qin Hao and his group of 9 perfect heavenly wheels were already standing side by side in front of him. Based on the divine will that had spread out from the attack just now, Yuhan stared at Tian Do. That was just a small test, Tian Do blew on his palm and said casually. Yuhan's eyes gradually darkened. His gaze swept across the faces of the 9 people one by one. Because he had never seen Qin Hao before, he could not recognize who it was. However, there were 9 perfect heavenly wheels in front of him now. None of them had a divine will that was weaker than his. It was to the extent that one of the 9 gave him an unfathomable feeling. That aura made him feel a deep sense of powerlessness. Yuhan rarely encountered such a feeling, and it only appeared when he was facing young Master Qing and Yu Shangqing. Even when facing Mochizuki in front of Yuhan, he did not feel powerless. He had 4 veins of the divine pattern. Even if he fought with Mochizuki, who had 5 veins of the divine pattern, he still had the ability to fight. Of course, the chances of him losing were higher. However, if he faced Qin Shaojun and Yu Shangqing, it would not be a matter of the chances of him losing. It would be a definite defeat. At this moment, Yu Han could not imagine that among the 9 people, there was actually a terrifying existence that was comparable to the Chongqing. No wonder you could defeat everyone and fight your way to the upper 9 heavens. I can't stop you. The others can go. You stay. Yu Han pointed at Tiando. His eyes flashed with a strong desire to battle. Tiando's fate spirit and heavenly wheels were similar to his, and they both used divine spears. He wanted to see if he was stronger or if his opponent was stronger. Thank you. Qin Hao nodded slightly at Yu Han. Yu Han only stopped Tiando and let the others pass. Firstly, he understood the situation very well. Secondly, it was not difficult to see the breadth of mind of the geniuses of the upper 9 races. How is it? Are you confident? Do you want me to stay with you? Alu glanced at Tiando. Tiando waved his hand at the crowd. I alone am enough. The others could pass, but only he could not. Was this a case of picking on the weak? Yu Han's action was clearly telling Tiando that among the 9 people, he was the weakest. Chapter 2272. 114 Chinese Network. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation edited by Mike. Your husband takes action above Moonflow Heaven. 2 dazzling streams of divine light faced off. Heaven wheels activated. Heaven Dipper and Yu Han both had perfect divine intents, and a sharp golden spear appeared in their hands. Qin Hao's group passed by, leaving Heaven Dipper behind. In an instant, the sound of weapons clashing could be heard from behind him, and it was as violent as a torrential rain. 9 perfect heaven wheels. Honor can't stop them, God Lord Yu Wu solemnly said as he looked at God Lord Zhonghua. The elders of the 9 clans were all silent. There was no need for them to use their divine senses to investigate. The 9 divine wills that had barged into the moon-flowing sky were very clear. Everyone present could feel that they had indeed underestimated the power around Qin Hao. This was actually the gathering of 9 perfect heavenly wheels. Yu Qian, Xiao Lei, God Lord Zhonghua grimly called out 2 names. Present. 91 Yu Qian. 92 Xiao Wutian, Xiao Lei. The 2 stepped forward. I order the 2 of you to assist Yu Han, God Lord Zhonghua ordered. Yes. Divine light flowed around their bodies, and they shot out of the Dao ground as beams of light. They quickly descended on the path of Qin Hao's group and blocked their path. Everyone, please stop. Yu Qian floated in the air with his hands behind his back, his robe fluttering in the wind. As one of the outstanding prodigies of the upper 9 races, he exuded a transcendent aura the moment he appeared. This is the end. We won't allow you to continue running wild. Xiao Lei's dark purple skin crackled with lightning, and his stout body seemed extremely muscular. We came all the way from the lower realms, so I presume that the 2 of you already knew why we came. We can't run wild, but we also can't stop. I hope that the 2 of you can make things easy for us, Qin Hao politely said. Up ahead is the Dao battlefield of the upper 9 races, and the god lords of the upper 9 races are all gathered there. Does your excellency think that I can let you pass? Yu Qian coldly said. Do you mean that we have to fight? Qin Hao felt that it was best not to fight. If the other party insisted on stopping him, he would not show any mercy. Unless the cultivation battle ends, don't even think about passing. Yu Qian gave his bottom line. Zhan Lang, Yu Feng. I'll leave these 2 to the 4 of you. We'll leave first. Zhan Wu was too lazy to waste his breath here. Wait for the law battle to end? Could Qin Hao afford to wait? Let's go. Qin Hao stepped out, leading the way. Since the upper 9 clans were determined to stop him from meeting Xiaohan, there was no need for him to be polite to the upper 9 clans. Whether it was fair or not, whether it was martial arts or not, he would deal with it according to Zhan Wu's method. He would let Zhang Lang's 4 perfect heavens wheels fight against 2. He wanted to see how Yugon and Xiaolei would deal with it. How stubborn. Yu Qian raised his hand and the pine sea and forest diagram emerged from the radiance of the heavenly wheel. The boundless shadow of the primordial pine tree covered his body, making him look like a towering divine tree. At this moment the world seemed to have turned green. Boom! Xiaolei raised his hand and smashed down with his hammer. A twisting bolt of lightning shot out from the purple-copper divine hammer and struck directly at Qin Hao. "Your opponents are us," Zhang Lang said coldly. The 4 heavenly generals' wheels of the Great Path exploded from their bodies at the same time. A beam of domineering blade aura that could swallow the sea and drive away waves slashed out, colliding with the lightning. Yugon pinched his fingers and the huge pine tree swayed. With a rustling sound, dense and sharp pine needles fell down. It was like a downpour from the sky, covering everyone's heads. Seeing this, Qin Qing opened his palms and stomped down with his right foot. Bang! The sound of his footsteps landed on the ground, and a spinning green jade tower flew out from his wheel light. It gave birth to 1, 2, and 1,000. It transformed into a row of resplendent shadows, surrounding him in the center. "Go!" Qin Qing pointed his finger upwards, and the densely packed palaces around him rose at the same time, hovering in the air above everyone. The magnificent palaces reflected each other's brilliance, causing a mysterious resonance with each other. It was as if a towering city had been built in an instant, silently swallowing the falling pine needles. Array! Yugon was stunned and frowned. If he knew this would happen, he would have asked Xinghuan to come with him. The 95th heaven of righteousness and harmony was good at this. Bang! While he was distracted, Yugon suddenly felt a heavy palm coming from behind. The palm power was so strong that it passed through his wheel of light and into his body. It shook his blood and qi and made him lose his balance and take a step forward. Hee. Yu Feng's palms changed. Just as Yu Qian turned around to look at him, his feet flickered with a hazy halo, and he disappeared from his original position like a ghost. Following that, he struck out another palm, and it was actually aimed at Yu Qian's front. Without a doubt, Yu Feng was using the secret technique that Denda taught them in the past, the water and wind divine flash. It was also the secret technique of the alchemy lord race in the Archean world. The powerful divine power of the palm struck the wheel of light. Although the impact was reduced a lot, it still made Yugen's chest hurt and his head buzzed. Along with this, the shadow of the ancient pine that shrouded his body became thinner. Qin Hao continued forward with Vivian, Zhan Wu, and Alu Zhan Lang, and the other 3 had learned many of his martial arts and divine skills. When the 4 of them worked together, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were half of Qin Hao. They had Zhan Lang for strong attacks, Qin Qing for formations, Yu Feng for sneak attacks, and New Moon could use the cauldron spirit to restore them and replenish their divine power. 4 against 2, and all of them had 40,000 years of cultivation. If they couldn't win, the 4 divine generals under Dendi would have to pack up and return to the divine wilderness for seclusion. Motherf ***, shameless. So what if I'm shameless? Bite me. Yugon, why didn't you ask Xinghuan and Xiaoya to come together? 2 against 4, you're very brave. Yugon remained silent because he couldn't find the time to argue with Xiaolei. These 4 opponents were too difficult to deal with. Buzz 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 buzz. 4 streams of light flew forward. The divine masters in the training hall didn't even have the time to send a 3rd wave of disciples before Qin Hao and the others arrived at the most sacred gathering place of the upper 9 clans. The moment they landed, Qin Hao's gaze swept across the training hall. This oval-shaped ancient training hall was filled with almost 1,000 people. Every one of them emitted an extremely powerful divine intent aura. Around 80% of them were perfect. In particular, there were a dozen or so seats floating in the air. On them sat a group of graceful and noble people. They were the divine masters of the upper 9 clans, as well as experts who were comparable to divine masters. There was also the main seat right in front. When Qin Hao looked over, his expression was especially solemn. There were 3 figures sitting on the main seat. The one in the middle was an old man in his 60s. He was Yu Shintian, who had forcibly taken Xiao Han away from the sword world. This old man still had a cold expression on his face. His solemn face was 70% domineering and 30% majestic. To his left, there was a person wearing a moonlight divine robe. To be able to sit on the same level as the great elder of the Moon Flow Divine Clan, he could only be the clan leader of the Moon Flow Divine Clan. The divine intent aura of the person on the right was even stronger. Although it was restrained and didn't leak out at all, Qin Hao's eyelids twitched when he looked over. The primordial bloodline of an innate life form had an innate pressure on other heavenly wheels. Qin Hao had this feeling when he faced Jun Imo. Today, he felt it again. There was no doubt that the person on the right of Yu Shintian had a direct blood relationship with the master of the Heavy Flower Divine Realm, Heavy Flower Immortal King. The hall was silent for a very long time. After Qin Hao's gaze fell on the 3 people on the main seat, he didn't look away. He knew very well that these 3 people were all great God. They were on the same level as the superiors, the Sky Supervisor, and God Bai of the Cloud Pool Divine Realm. Their divine might was so strong that it was second only to the Divine King of the primeval universe. This was very different from Yu Yuanjin. Yu Yuanjin had just become a great god and could only be considered a beginner. The power of the divine way of the 3 great gods on the main seat was far, far greater than Yu Yuanjin's. Interesting. In the quiet hall, the first person to break the deadlock was the great elder of the Moon Flow Divine Clan, Yu Shintian. He crossed his arms and leaned back on the huge chair. His sharp and cold eyes unexpectedly flashed with a hint of interest as Qin Hao descended. He thought of the past. When they first met, Qin Hao had been heavily surrounded by the Divine King's army. He was like a small beast in a cage waiting to be slaughtered. He was surrounded by mortal enemies on all sides. He was weak, helpless, and miserable. But to his surprise, when they met again, he had fought his way from the lower realms all the way to the 97th layer of the Heavy Flower Divine Realm, standing in front of Yu Shintian. Even though the scene was similar, Qin Hao was being looked down upon by the strongest heavenly wheel experts of the upper 9 races. However, what was different from back then in the sword world was that Qin Hao didn't show the slightest bit of helplessness or weakness. On the contrary, he stood very straight. The upper 9 races seemed to be looking down on him, but his figure gave people the feeling that they needed to look up to him. From head to toe, Yu Shintian could sense that Qin Hao was exuding great confidence. In 1,000 years, from the strength of a single lineage that had just entered the divine realm, you have grown to the point where you can lead people to fight your way to the upper 9 layers. It seems that the Chaos Divine artifact Samsara Mirror truly has a heaven-defying effect. Yu Shintian revealed a rare smile. In the past, when he led the divine cavalry of the Moonflow clan to the Sword World and even openly took away his granddaughter from Jun Mo's army, he naturally understood many things. The Samsara Mirror was no secret to Yu Shintian. And the reason Qin Hao could have his current strength and confidence was clearly because of the Samsara Mirror. Empyrean Divine praises me too much. This junior crossed the great desolate era from the ancient underworld to the Heavy Flower Divine Realm. Because I missed my wife and was impatient, I offended the god races of the various heavens. If there was any disrespect, I hope that the Divine Lord Seniors present will forgive me. Qin Hao cupped his fists together and bowed towards the high-level figures of the upper 9 races. In terms of status, he was the son-in-law of the Moonflow clan. Now that he had used his fists to attack his mother-in-law's home, this was naturally disrespectful and extremely inappropriate. But he had no other choice. If he didn't attack, then these heavens wouldn't open their doors. How bold of you, to cause such chaos in my Moonflow God clan's holy land, men. Bang! God Lord Moonflow slammed his palm down on the seat, causing 3 wine cups to shake. Moonflow. God Lord Deep Flower indicated for the Moonflow Patriarch to not be angry. He looked down and said, Qin Hao, I know some things about you. Your divine source was born in the primeval world, but because of the heavenly edict race, you were driven out and left homeless. Eventually, your whereabouts were unknown. Now, you have returned to the great desolate era and formed a relationship with Empyrean Divine's granddaughter. According to reason, you should be the son-in-law of my Heavy Flower Divine Realm. However, there are many things about the Heavy Flower Divine Realm that you do not understand. Senior Deep Flower, the reason I came here today is to understand the upper 9 races. No matter what test the 9 races have, this junior is willing to withstand it. What a coincidence, the 9 races are holding a law battle. How about this junior also participate? Qin Hao looked to the left of the Dao Field's host seat. He smiled towards Xiao Han and said, Xiao Han, how about watching your husband compete with the proud sons of heaven of the 9 races? Chapter 2273. 114 Chinese Network Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Not good enough. Qin Hao didn't know if it was because they had been separated for too long, but now that they were reunited, he felt that Han Er's temperament was different from before. There was a sense of coldness in her. As her husband, he felt a sense of distance. It was familiar yet strange. He missed her and felt a sense of novelty. In short, Qin Hao felt that Han Er had become more beautiful. He couldn't wait to rush up and take her into his arms. Participate in the cultivation tournament of the 9 clans? Humph! In the thousands of seats around the training hall, the higher-ups of the 9 clans were dissatisfied. Qin Hao's words had 2 meanings. First, he announced that Xiao Han was his wife. Second, he wanted to show off by participating in the debate of the 9 clans. Was he trying to show off his strength in front of the Divine Masters? Don't think that you've become arrogant just because you reach the upper 9 heavens. How much of the divine path of the 9 clans do you think you've seen? Young man, the divine path of the 9 clans is very deep. The dignified elders spoke coldly, as if mocking Qin Hao's ignorance. How could the lower worlds of the magnificent divine realm be compared to the upper 9 heavens? They admitted that Qin Hao did have some ability to fight his way up. However, if he wanted to use the Dao platform of the 9 clans as a stage to show off his own talent, haha, it was a beautiful idea, but it could only be a foolish fantasy. Good, my dear son-in-law, since you're in the mood, you can participate. Actually, I'd like to see your performance. Yu smiled like a spring breeze. She raised her hand and secretly pinched Xiao Han's hand. Since Qin Hao arrived, this girl had been in a daze and had forgotten to reply to her husband. Madam, you look graceful, beautiful, and intelligent. You must be Han Er's birth mother. Your son-in-law greets mother-in-law. Qin Hao bowed in Yu's direction. He was even more respectful than the divine masters of the 9 clans. Yu covered her mouth and chuckled. She looked at Qin Hao with more and more satisfaction. No wonder he had managed to trick her daughter into his hands. Besides being loyal, he also had a way of speaking. Yu laughed. In this solemn Tao, the 9 clans. Translation. 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 Unu. Translation. 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 Translation was translation. Translation was translation. 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 Translation, translation, translation. Translation, translation, you. No, God, Lord Moonflow barked. Qin Hao was an outsider, not a member of the 9 clans. Translation, 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 translation is translation, 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 translation is translation, is translation, is translation. Translation is translation, is translation. Of S is translation? Is. Translation was. If we don't allow him to participate, won't our 9 clans silently admit that we are inferior to him? Yu Shintian faced the disciples of the 9 clans. Are you all afraid? No fear. The disciples of the 9 clans shouted in unison. What kind of joke was this? They were the most talented descendants of the god race in the flower recapture realm. How could they be afraid of a heaven wheel expert from the outside world? Qin Hao had led his people from the lower worlds and swept through the flower layer realm. They had fought their way up to the upper world. The disciples of the 9 clans were already angry. They were worried that they had nowhere to vent their anger. If they were misunderstood as being afraid of Qin Hao because of this, the disciples of the 9 clans would not be able to go out anymore. How embarrassing would that be? It's fine as long as you are not afraid. Since that is the case, I permit it. Yu decided. God Lord Yu's pupils constricted and his chest puffed out. He took in a deep breath and said no more. The Grand Elder of Yu had already spoken. If he continued to interfere, it would not be good. After all, Qin Hao was the future son-in-law of Yu. Fine. Who wants to experience Qin Hao's divine Tao? God Lord Chonghua looked down and asked. I, Chunba of the 93rd level pure martial heaven, would like to ask for guidance. Dong. A muscular man with a fierce physique and a black beard jumped out of his seat and landed in the middle of the training ground. In the previous battle, he had lost to Xiaoyao of the 94th level. But he had never lost to Qin Hao. Since Qin Hao had issued a challenge to the 9 clans, as a disciple of the 9 clans, Chunba naturally had to step forward. As he spoke, Chunba's body erupted with dazzling light. Divine power flowed through his body, and his aura formed a universe of the great Tao. He had perfect 4 meridians. Qin Hao glanced at Chunba and quietly chuckled, but he did not step forward. Just 4 meridians was no match for him. I have come to experience the divine Tao of the 93rd level pure martial god clan. Alu stepped out from behind Qin Hao, taking off his heavy armor of the setting sun peak. He also did not have the heavy golden sword in his hand. His thin robes added to his youthful aura. Chunba looked at Zhang Lu walking towards him and couldn't help but frown. Then, he looked at Qin Hao. Was he looking down on him? You are not my uncle's match. He is afraid of hurting you, so let me do it. To show his respect, Zhang Lu immediately opened his arms. Divine Tao cyclones began to spiral from the bottom of his feet, turning into a small whirlwind. At the same time, the wheel light whizzed out. Divine power extended to every part of his body like veins. The great Tao became one, forming a universe of its own. 4 dark golden divine veins appeared at the edge of the wheel light. Perfect heavenly wheel, 4 divine veins. At the banquet table, the divine masters and elders were slightly surprised. Although they had sensed that Qin Hao's group's divine intents were at the perfect grade, it was still surprising that any one of them had 40,000 years of cultivation. This was truly shocking to the 9 clans' upper echelons. How is it? Zhang Lu asked Chunba. Chunba nodded. You are qualified to fight with me. Although Qin Hao was not the one fighting, this handsome young man with a strong aura was not weaker than Chunba. Then, Your Excellency, please be careful. As Zhang Lu's voice fell, his eyes suddenly changed, emitting an iron-blooded sharp light. He seemed to have become the commander of Zhang Lu of the Sunset Peak. Whoosh! His figure could not be seen clearly. When Chunba reacted, His expression changed greatly. He suddenly shouted, closing his 5 cocoon fingers, forming a hand knife, and chopping in front of him. Dong! An incomparably violent collision sound reverberated. Intense divine light particles exploded in front of Chun Ba. His tall and sturdy body kept sliding back. His 5 fingers were trembling incessantly. He was already unable to keep his fingers together as they loosened and scattered. This punch is the War God Clan's 10 Earths shattering sky strike. I haven't completely mastered it yet, hee. Zhan Lu appeared in front of Chun Ba, maintaining his punching posture. The water wind god under his feet was as fast as a gust of wind. Without waiting for Chun Ba to stand firm, he rushed forward and punched again. Bang! Chun Ba did not even have time to form a hand knife. He could only cover his face with his hands and push it forward. Immediately, powerful battle intent particles surged. He let out a strange cry and his body slid back again. As he retreated, he let out an angry roar. So strong. What kind of movement divine skill is that? The juniors of the upper 9 races were shocked. Many of them stood up from their seat. Primordial Realms venerated Pill Race's God Step and War God Clan's Fist of Battle Intent. This child has cultivated 2 innate God Race's supreme arts. If he uses them well, he is a rare talent. God Lord Zhonghua nodded and commented. As the son of immortal King Dao Ling, God Lord Zhonghua naturally recognized the divine skills of the venerated Pill Race and War God Clan. Yu Shintian's expression also turned a little more serious. He silently looked at Qin Hao, his emotions inexplicably becoming somewhat complicated. On the other hand, God Lord Moonflow and God Lord Pure Martial had rather unsightly expressions. In just one exchange, Chun Ba, who was at the 93rd level, had been suppressed. Although Chun Ba was not a godson, he was the son of the Pure Martial race's 3rd elder and a top-class perfect prodigy of the race. Xiaoya had used more than 60 moves to defeat Chun Ba, and she had single-handedly suppressed him for 40 moves. No one had expected that Chun Ba, who was also a perfect Formeridian expert, would be forced back in the first exchange. One could easily imagine how the upper echelons of the upper 9 races and their juniors were feeling. Let me experience it as well. Next to God Lord Xiaohe and God Lord Xiaohe, Goddess Xiaoya was indignant as if her pride had been struck. She soared into the air and formed a divine seal. In an instant, countless mysterious runes transformed into divine talismans that descended from the sky. Each of them flickered with a dazzling divine light that seemed to be able to purify anything in the world as they descended towards Qin Hao. Let me. Vivian raised her head and looked at the falling divine talismans. She waved her hand and grabbed the sword that she always carried with her. With a stomp of her feet, she swung her sword at the falling divine talismans. Crescent moons slashed at them, causing sword chi and divine talismans to explode. The sword in Vivian's hand had been forged by her father, Penglai artifact Immortal Mu Xinzhao. She had never been willing to replace it and had nurtured it until now, allowing it to accompany her in attaining divinity. Vivian, that woman isn't easy to deal with. Be careful, Qin Hao messaged. He could tell through his intuition whether or not she was a true prodigy. The large man from the pure martial race fighting with Alu seemed strong and courageous, but in truth, he had his weaknesses. Moreover, Alu seemed to have seen through his opponent's weaknesses and was able to quickly establish an advantage over him. However, this woman who used divine talismans had exquisite control over divine art. One could see from her expression that she was extremely confident. Moreover, she had one more divine vein than Vivian and 50,000 years of cultivation. Don't worry. I won't embarrass you, Vivian replied. Vivian replied via voice transmission. The sword light in her hand danced, and as the radiant wheel of light continued to pour divine power into the sword light, the divine runes and sword light above the dojo became dazzling and intertwined to form an absolute domain of light. The reason why Vivian attacked was that her opponent's divine talisman also had the attribute of light. It had fused with the most primitive light of judgment of the primitive era. She was confident that in the great Tao of light, no one's will was stronger than hers. "I'm afraid you'll get hurt," Qin Hao said quietly as he looked at the two battles. He came today to reunite with Xiao Han, but he didn't want Vivian to get hurt because of him. "Sister Vivian." Xiao Han sat in his seat and watched Mu Yue fight hard in the dojo. After 1,000 years, Vivian, Zhan Wu, Zhan Lu, and the others had all come out of the divine wilderness and found Qin Hao. With Qin Hao's help, they raised their cultivation to the power of 4 meridians. Everyone was fighting for her. Especially Vivian. Xiao Han looked at the woman dancing with her sword in the dojo and felt that he owed her something. Xiao Han knew that Vivian wasn't fighting just for her, but more for Qin Hao. As his wife, Vivian had done even more for Qin Hao. As long as it was something Qin Hao wanted, she would do it without any complaints and fulfill his wishes. Xiao Han felt that she wasn't good enough in this regard. Chapter 2274. On setting Sun Peak, Empress Ziwei and Dende had accompanied each other for several hundred years, and with Qin Hao's rebirth, Mu Yue had waited for him for another 600 years. Just how tenacious was this love? 1,000 years had passed in the blink of an eye. In the mortal world, a girl had endured 1,000 years and still persisted. Just how rare and precious was her character. Not to mention 1,000 years, even if it was 3 years, 1 year, or even a short month, it would be enough to stop countless mortal men and women from interacting with each other. The so-called pledge of eternal love would become tasteless in just a few days. Compared to Weiwei, she was far too stubborn, so stubborn that even Xiao Han felt sorry for her. But all of this had not been in vain. Her 1,000 years of bitter waiting had been exchanged for a perfect answer, and she had finally become a couple with Qin Hao. On the Tao field, there were 2 groups of 4 perfect heaven wheel experts engaged in a fierce battle. Divine talismans and sword glows intersected, fist glows clashed with saber energy, and the upper echelons of the 9 races were dumbfounded. The upper 9 races had probably never imagined that the heaven wheel experts of the outside world would be able to fight so brilliantly with their descendants. Even if they had, it should have been some other god-king level faction, not some random group of people that Qin Hao had brought. On War Tower's side, they had completely suppressed their opponent. In just 10 exchanges, Chunba's saber energy had weakened, showing signs of defeat. War Tower's war race fist intent was simply too strong, and the upper 9 races could sense that he was still holding back. Perhaps out of consideration for the face of the heavy glory divine realm, War Tower was able to thoroughly defeat the prodigies of Chun Wu Celestial. As they watched Chunba barely hold on, the elders of the upper 9 races shook their heads. Previously, when they had been immersed in the sparring between the upper 9 races, they had felt that the descendants of 9th Heaven had all performed outstandingly. But now, when they compared themselves to the heaven wheel experts of the outside world, their shortcomings were completely exposed. On Xiaoya's side, she was 10,000 years stronger than her opponent and had the advantage of her divine bloodline. As she stabilized the situation, Goddess Xiaohe gradually began to exert her strength, faintly suppressing her opponent. But defeating her opponent was still somewhat difficult. That girl's sword intent contains extremely pure sacred light energy, a wisp of the origin of light. What is her relationship with the Light God King? God Lord Chonghua muttered to himself as he watched the battle. It seemed like he was talking to himself, but it also seemed like he was talking to Moon Shintian and God Lord Moonflow. It should have nothing to do with the Radiant God King, Yu Shintian said. The light elements seemed very similar, but the two were fundamentally different. Heavens, I remember you once said that there is another original realm in the primordial world, right? God Lord Moonflow looked at the moon god Heaven. A long time ago, in order to bring back Yu Yuanyu, who had secretly fled to the lower realms, the moon god Heaven had entered a very special heavenly Tao. According to the moon god Heaven, that heavenly Tao was filled with the primordial chaos Tao intent of the primordial chaos. Now that Qin Hao brought a batch of perfect heavenly wheels, could it be that they came from there? I already said that this matter is not to be brought up again. Don't even think about that Fong Tiandao. Moon Shintian sensed the restless gaze in God Lord Yuelio's eyes and immediately put on a cold and callous expression. The original realm. Branded with the imprint of the primordial era, everything in the world, even ants, contained immeasurable treasures. Endless potential could be unearthed everywhere, and their value was boundless. In the primordial world, not a single heavenly wheel could resist the allure of the original realm, much less a God King. The God King and the other Scientian lifeforms originated from the primordial chaos. They didn't understand why they were born, so they all wanted to uncover the mysteries of the primordial chaos. But, throughout the boundless primordial world, only the primordial world had a complete heavenly Tao, and it was known as the heart of the primordial world. Besides this, there was no other original realm. The primordial world was the only complete world left behind after the primordial world was broken apart. It was different from the other divine worlds. For instance, the heavy flower divine realm, myriad saints dragon palace, cloud pool sacred realm, and even the southern heaven Buddha world were complete post-celestial heavenly Tao. They were worlds formed from the God King's Tao intent, and they existed because of the God King. The primordial world was a pre-celestial original world. It was born from the primordial chaos, and it hid the mysteries of the primordial world. In the end, it was fundamentally different from the post-celestial worlds created by the God King. Cough cough, the battlefield is so exciting right now. Let's enjoy the law battles. Today we will only discuss the Tao and nothing else. God Lord Heavy Flower coughed, easing the tension between Moon Shintian and God Lord Yuelu. In truth, he was also curious about the primordial heavenly Tao that Empyrean Divine had entered in the past. But, he knew that it was nearly impossible to find out the whereabouts of the heavenly Tao from Moon Shintian. In order to protect Xiao Yunu had threatened Moon Shintian with his life, hoping that he wouldn't touch the divine wilderness or reveal its secrets. This was the reason why Yunu was willing to be a caged bird after returning to the Moonflow clan, never taking half a step out of his palace. Otherwise, with Moon Shintian's temperament and methods, he would have long since taken the divine wilderness as his possession and become the master of the original realm. What a pity! God Lord Yuelu coldly sneered. Then, he turned his gaze towards the battlefield. Leaving the original realm with limitless potential and not using it was not Moon Shintian's style. He suspected that Moon Shintian wanted to take it all for himself, even if both sides were Moon Clan Divine Spirit. One was the Patriarch and the other was the Great Elder. But in the end, the blazing moon and cold moon of the 97th heaven belonged to two different factions. Boom! There was a loud explosion in the field. The brilliant fighting spirit particles on Zhan Lu's body surged, forming the shape of a gold-plated armor. He immediately punched out, shaking the heavens. Releasing the honest battle scripture and abandoning his 6 senses and 9 senses, Alu completely entered a state of unintentional, thoughtless, and soulless frenzy. There was only the opponent in his eyes. The power of this punch was simply earth-shattering, causing the universe to change color. It struck Chun Ba so hard that he was like a straw falling from the sky. His body was twisted out of shape in the storm of fist intent. The pure martial divine blade in his hand shattered as he let out a hoarse cry. He crashed outside the training ground, shattering the stone tiles. I couldn't control it for a moment. Sorry, it was a little heavy. Alu dispersed the light wheel and withdrew his fighting intent. He didn't even glance at Chun Ba, as if he had done something insignificant. He turned around and returned to Qin Hao's side, standing there obediently. Zhan Wu silently glanced at Xiao Lu, the corners of his eyes twitching. This kid really didn't know how to hold back. Didn't he leave any face for the upper 9 clans? Xiao Lu gave Zhan Wu an innocent look. He had already punched out 15 times and was already impatient. In fact, he was already very considerate of Chun Ba's feelings. The 9 clan elders were speechless. Divine Lord Pure Martial waved his hand. Immediately, 2 youths flew out from the clan and helped Chun Ba up. This punch seemed violent, but at the crucial moment it dispersed the impact of the law, so it didn't cause any fatal injuries. Amazing, little brother. Chun Ba admit defeat. Panting heavily, the big man of the 93rd heaven didn't get angry. Instead, with the help of his companions, he gave Ah Lu a thumbs up, his eyes filled with admiration. After all, they both had perfect heaven wheels and were on the same level. There weren't many people in all the Divine King clans in the untainted universe who could defeat him in 15 moves and suppress Chun Ba. Old brother, you're also not bad. Your skin is thick and you can take a beating. Zhan Lu smiled and replied. Ha ha. Chun Ba was startled. Soon after, he let out a heroic laugh and said, I lost. If I was lucky enough to fight little brother again, Chun Ba wouldn't be like this. Yes, I will also become stronger, Xiao Lu said. The 2 nodded in tacit understanding. Chun Ba limped back to his seat with the help of his companions. At this time, there was still one battle that hadn't been decided yet. Chapter 2275. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Vivian and Xiao Ya had fought for more than 15 rounds. The frequency of their battle was extremely fast. Talismans descended one after another, and sword light shot out one after another, creating layers of explosive light wave. What a divine power of light! Xiaoya was shocked. Not only was it divine, but the power of the will was also extremely pure. It was enough to contend with the divine power of her 5 meridians. Xiaoya's hands moved back and forth, weaving into a phantom. The divine light flowing on her body became more and more turbulent. With a shout, Xiaoya separated her palms and pointed forward with her slender fingers. In an instant, 20 talismans spiraled out from her body and turned into a circle of light. Like a cover, it fell toward Vivian's head. Between the talismans, streaks of lightning overflowed, carrying the terrifying power of divine light. They resonated with each other and faintly formed a matrix. When Vivian looked up, she immediately felt a pressure descending. She brushed her sword with her left hand, and the divine sword in her hand glowed with the divine light of the great path. It condensed into a pure sword of light. The shadow of the sword split and turned into countless streams of air that went against the sky and pierced the falling talismans. At this time, the talismans suddenly condensed into a chain of light. No matter how the sword chi shot out, it was stubborn and undamaged. It pressed down forcefully and shrunk until it trapped Vivian. Sister Vivian, Xiao Han cried out involuntarily. Yu Yuanyu secretly glanced at Xiao Han and noticed that Xiao Han was very nervous and full of concern. He thought that the woman fighting with Xiaoya in the field seemed to have a special relationship with Xiao Han. Even Qin Hao's expression changed. What were these 3 playing at? They didn't seem to be ordinary friends. In the field, Xiaoya used the great divine light spell of the Xiaohe clan. Unparalleled divine power condensed into an unbreakable Vajra ring around Vivian's body. As Xiaoya clenched her fist, the ring of light burst with the divine light of the great path. It quickly shrunk and wrapped around Vivian tightly. At this moment, Qin Hao and the others' expressions changed. They felt a trace of uneasiness. Break! Vivian scolded softly. The Tianluan shone brightly and her body turned into pure light. A sword pagoda flew out of her body and shattered the Xiaohe clan's great divine light spell before the chains of light tightened. Xiao Ya's face was pale from the impact of the laws. She watched as Vivian was enveloped by the light god tower, and her lips trembled. Who? Qin Hao's suspended heart calmed down. He exhaled a heavy breath. That was really dangerous. However, he was more surprised that Vivian had mastered the seamless world sword technique. The sword pagoda that enveloped her was exactly the same as the green pagoda in the Seamless Academy. The only difference was that their attributes were different. Are you surprised? We didn't just enjoy a peaceful life in the sword world. Everyone worked very hard, Zhanwu said quietly. I was indeed surprised and pleasantly surprised. Qin Hao nodded. Vivian was proficient in the sword Dao. They had once worked together to create the rainbow sword technique. It had 3 moves, and the graceful sword was only the first move. Now, he witnessed her mastery of the great Dao divine technique of the seamless divine lord. He was surprised but also expected it. To be more precise, Vivian should be using the Sword God King's technique. The seamless divine lord was the Sword God King's inheritor. What a powerful sword Dao divine pagoda! Xiao Ya looked at the glowing divine pagoda and the figure of the woman in the pagoda. She felt troubled. It could even shatter the Xiaohe clan's great divine light spell. One could imagine how powerful the sword pagoda was. Let's both use our strongest moves. Otherwise, it will be difficult to determine the victor between us. Vivian stood in the light pagoda and suggested to Xiao Ya. All right. Xiao Ya nodded. Vivian was weaker than her by 1 divine vein, but her divine power was not weak. From a fair point of view, she was already at a disadvantage. At this moment, both sides reached an agreement to use their strongest moves to determine the victor. Xiao Ya reached out with her right hand, and a divine pearl of light appeared in her palm. Holy light flowed within it, looking solemn and holy. The heavenly pearl of life spirit was of the light attribute. It was also the source of Xiao Ya's divine power. As she chanted, the divine light from the heavenly jewel in her palm grew more and more dazzling, illuminating the entire Dao platform. Many of the young men and women of the 9 clans could not help but raise their hands to cover their faces. The elders of the 9 clans nodded, and they looked confident. It was as if they were very confident in Xiao Ya's next move. In the divine light pagoda, as Vivian slashed with her sword, the pagoda rumbled. Beams of light flew out one after another, condensing into 80 beams of sword chi that floated around the pagoda. The tips of the swords were pointed at the sky, ready to attack. Vivian has indeed grasped the essence of Senior's seamless sword Dao. Qin Hao nodded inwardly. He looked at the 80 beams of sword chi. To be precise, there were 81 beams of sword chi. The sword pagoda was a sword, and it was the strongest sword. It was the core sword. Moreover, the 81 beams of sword will faintly formed a sword waterfall that was becoming more and more vigorous. It looked calm now, but once it was activated, it would definitely be breathtaking. It seems like this battle is in the bag. Zhan Wu's grave expression relaxed a little. He knew the power of Vivian's sword technique. After all, Vivian had suffered a lot to cultivate this sword technique. The elders of the 9 clans were confident in Xiao Ya, and so were Zhan Wu and the others. They firmly believed that Vivian's sword technique would definitely win. Chapter 2276. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The heavenly jewel life spirit floated above her palm like a pearl of light. It flashed with the divine light of the great path and illuminated the entire training ground. Around Xiao Ya, divine runes formed chains of light. There were a total of 3 chains, and they revolved slowly around her body. Xiao Ya's aura changed drastically. She had turned into the goddess of light with her saintly might. Her radiance illuminated the surroundings, and a powerful sense of pressure immediately enveloped the training ground. Opposite her, Vivian stood inside the divine tower of light. Outside the tower, there were 80 divine swords of light. They were all upside down with their tips facing the sky. Victory and defeat would be decided with one move. In the seats, the upper echelons of the 9 clans watched intently. They were nervous, but there was a hint of excitement on their faces. After this move, who would win? Come! Xiaoya called out softly. The heavenly jewel in her palm floated in the air. Within the heavenly wheel of the great path, waves of majestic divine power mixed with lightning that was close to light poured into the heavenly jewel. The heavenly jewel grew bigger and the divine light it emitted became more and more dazzling. Sister Vivian, be careful. Xiao Han stood up unknowingly. He looked at the battle with concern. Vivian nodded in Xiao Han's direction. She raised the divine sword in her hand. Unparalleled sword chi surged along her body, causing her hair to flutter. Following this, the divine tower roared. The 80 divine swords of light began to tremble restlessly. There was a faint sound of a sword waterfall flowing through the air. Divine light of heaven, purify all worlds. Xiaoya's divine will merged into the heavenly jewel. It was as if her soul had entered it. There was a violent explosion in the void. The huge heavenly jewel that enveloped the training ground rose like a mountain from the ground. It shot into the vast sky like a meteor. It brought with it the power to destroy all worlds as it smashed toward the sword tower. Go! The divine sword of light in Vivian's hand let out a sharp sound as if it was giving an order. Suddenly, the 80 divine swords that were circling outside the divine tower hummed. They shot into the sky and pierced toward the heavenly jewel. It was a spectacular scene. How exciting! Is that girl from the sword world? The sword way of the sword world is rumored to be weak. Now that I see it, it's all nonsense. With such a talented girl in the way of the sword, how could the sky divine realm was so arrogant back then? Everyone, don't forget that there are no god kings in the sword world. Aren't the god king forces taking advantage of this? How sad. Was of the sword of the 9 upper 9 clans. Because the sword because the sword because sword sword was translation because translation life translation was translation sound streaks of holy light sword chi carried the momentum of a waterfall, and like a surging river of swords, they crazily attacked the heavenly jewel that was smashing down. The heavenly jewel that was overflowing with divine light was especially intense, forming a protective barrier. When the holy light divine swords approached, they were constantly broken into pieces, and were completely unable to stop the heavenly jewel from smashing down. Seeing this, Xiaoya's lips curled into a proud smile. On the other hand, Vivian's expression became more and more serious. When all 80 divine swords shattered the heavenly jewel, she let out a long roar. Her divine intent resonated with the divine tower of light. The divine tower that enveloped her body soared into the sky and condensed into a huge divine sword of light. With a boom, it struck the core of the heavenly jewel, shattering the barrier of divine light and stabbing into the heavenly jewel. Immediately, rows of fine cracks appeared on the heavenly jewel. Its falling momentum was stopped and it began to move forward. It was unable to crush the divine tower of light that was blocking its path. I've been waiting for this moment. You've lost. Xiao Ya's 2 slender hands formed a dazzling array of divine seals. Following which, the 3 layers of divine chains surrounding her body erupted with dazzling light and left her body, crushing Vivian's body. With the protection of the sword pagoda, the Xiaohe clan's great divine light incantation could not break through her defense. However, as Vivian activated the sword pagoda to block the heavenly jewel's pressure, Xiaoya, who had secretly prepared a second attack, immediately released the divine chains on her body. This time, Vivian did not have any defensive power around her. In order to block the heavenly jewel, she had used all her strength. She could only attack but not defend. You're right. I've been waiting for this moment. Sword abandonment calamity. Vivian roared and a sword shadow that was as fast as lightning flew out from her hand. It attacked Xiaoya directly. She did not leave any defensive power behind, but Xiaoya did the same. If Xiaoya did not release the 3 divine chains on her body, Vivian would not have dared to underestimate this sword attack. The last sword calamity of the Shadow 3 sword calamities, sword abandonment calamity. If you can't defeat your opponent, you will be defeated. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 3 divine chains that fell down twisted and intertwined with each other, tightly binding Vivian's body. However, it was only an ethereal and formless shadow. After the divine chains hit her, they immediately turned into bubbles. As for Vivian's true body, she followed the flying sword light towards Xiaoya's body. When the sharp tip of the sword touched Xiaoya's neck, her face became extremely pale. You've lost. Vivian smiled symbolically. Boom. The heavenly jewel shattered and the sword pagoda collapsed. In the sky, the strongest attack that both parties had released was destroyed. However, Vivian had predicted her opponent's reaction. After her opponent launched the second attack, she turned the tables around and killed Xiaoya's throat. The elders of the 9 clans were shocked. Even some of the more shrewd elders looked at Vivian, who was pointing her sword at Xiaoya, in disbelief. This woman is really powerful. Sigh. Xiaoya Divine Lord slammed his hands on the table helplessly and sighed. He did not expect that his daughter would fall into the abyss of failure when victory was in sight. It could only be said that Xiaoya was not weak. It was just that she was not as experienced as that girl from the Sword Realm and fell into her trap. Amazing. Qin Hao's eyes flickered. He didn't expect this to be the result. He thought that Vivian would pour all her power into the last sword of the 81 sword strikes and forcefully break Xiaoya's heavenly fate jewel. However, it seemed that he was too naive. After all, Xiaoya's opponent had 10,000 years more cultivation than Vivian. Their divine powers were similar and Xiaoya's opponent had a slight advantage. Therefore, how could the last sword be broken so easily? Even if it was broken, Vivian's divine power would be greatly weakened and Xiaoya's heavenly fate jewel would be weakened. Shadowless is indeed the #1 sword emperor in the East continent. The strength of his sword technique is considered a consummate skill even in the divine Tao, Zhan Wu said quietly. It's true that it's a consummate skill, but it takes a lot of effort to master it. I really didn't expect that not only did Vivian learn the sword world divine ability, she even stole Wu Kei's consummate skill. Qin Hao laughed heartily, secretly praising Vivian. Zhan Wu glanced at Qin Hao and said, "Stole? Why don't you use that word on yourself? It seems to be more appropriate to describe you." How many sword skills did Qin Hao steal from Wuk? He had already dug up all the secrets of the sword sect in the south region. I lost. Xiaoya lowered her head in disappointment. Her eyes were glistening with tears. She had one more divine power and still lost. It was really embarrassing. You are very powerful. If not for our lack of experience, it would have been hard to predict who would win. Vivian dispersed the divine sword in her hand and said something very pertinent. Then she floated down and returned to Qin Hao's side. Phew! Xiao Han heaved a sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his worried face. It seems that you get along very well with that girl. You seem to have guessed something and said with hidden meaning. Mother, you can tell? Xiao Han looked surprised. Well, now I can really see that no man is faithful. You shook her head. She did not know how many women Xiao Yi had around him. Although it was normal for men to have concubines, especially when an emperor had a harem. However, which woman in the world did not want to be the only one in their lover's heart? Chapter 2277. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The goddess of the Xiaohe clan was not weak. She was very talented in any clan in the upper 9 levels. But it was precisely because of the peaceful environment that the descendants of the 9 clans lacked combat experience. Even though her talent and divine power were not inferior to Weiwei's, she lost this battle. Weiwei had lived in the gap between the 3 clans of Penglai since she was young. Her living environment forced her to live with blood. After becoming an emperor, in order to stabilize the ruling position of the Mu clan, she had been stationed at the front line of the island for many years. After that, she had experienced so many cruel battles in the divine wilderness. In terms of combat skills, Xiaoyao, who was the goddess of the heaven realm, was too immature in front of Weiwei. The divine path of the 9 clans is indeed amazing. Compared to the lower worlds of the Zhonghua divine realm, it's too much. Qin Hao stood in the training hall and said to the higher-ups of the 9 clans. From the battle between Weiwei and Xiaoyao, it was enough to see the foundation of the upper 9 levels. Are you mocking the 9 clans? An elder of the 9 clans, sitting in a high seat, said majestically. Chun Ba defeated. Xiaoyao defeated again. Not only was she beaten to the 9th level, but now, Qin Hao was still here making sarcastic remarks. How could the lower worlds compare to the upper 9 levels? The two were not comparable at all. You've won 2 battles, and now you're preaching to the 9 clans? Kid, the law battle has just begun. There are many peerless geniuses of the 9 clans here. Who's going to fight next? The elders turned around and looked at the juniors of the clans. After these 2 battles, the 9 clans had lost face. Qin Hao's words were like a stab to them. The higher-ups of the 9 clans felt an inexplicable sense of humiliation. I'll fight. A person stood up from his seat. He came to the 95th level, and was holding an astrolabe, Zheng Huan of the Shen clan. Zheng Huan's figure floated down with an immortal charm. He stood in the training hall and his gaze fell on Qin Hao. Qin Hao smiled at Zheng Huan, then looked away and faced the 3 great gods of the 9 tribes sitting in the main seats. He said, I've heard that the 97th layer Moon Flow clan has a peerless genius who is the youngest son of Divine Lord Moon Flow. Can you show yourself for a moment? Zheng Huan's face changed slightly. The leaders of the 9 clans were all stunned. What did Qin Hao mean by this? Mochizuki, the young master who looked down on Zheng Huan and wanted to directly challenge 97? He was truly arrogant. Did he not place the other 9 clans in his eyes? I am Mochizuki. Do you want to challenge me? On the right side of the host's seat, the seat closest to Moon Shintian, God Lord Zhonghua, and God Lord Moonflow, was occupied by Zhongqing, Yu Shangqing, and his younger brother Mochizuki. The 3 of them appeared to be very special and noble. At this time, Mochizuki stood up. She first looked at Xiao Han and then at Qin Hao, saying, I can give you a chance to challenge me. Qin Hao was Xiao Han's husband. This marriage had not obtained the approval of Empyrean Divine. Then, as the young master of the Moon Flow clan, Mochizuki naturally understood the purpose of today's law battle. Thus, in consideration of Xiao Han, she allowed Qin Hao to directly challenge her. Moreover, if Mochizuki personally defeated Qin Hao, this would highlight his ability and prove that Xiao Han didn't have good eyesight. However, Qin Hao smiled and shook his head. He said to Mochizuki, Young Master Shangqing guessed wrong. The one challenging you is not me, but, as Qin Hao's voice paused, Zhan Wu stepped out from behind him. His steady steps, powerful figure, and arrogant attitude caused the 9 clans to look at him in a new light. They could feel that this person wasn't ordinary. Mochizuki frowned. By allowing Qin Hao to challenge her, she was already being lenient. But now, Qin Hao sent someone else to challenge her. Was this looking down on her, Mochizuki? Young man, you are looking down on my 9 clans too much. In the many seats of the Moon Flow clan, the freckled 3rd elder's expression turned icy cold. I am not looking down on you. I am the son of the primeval world's war god clan's war god city's city lord. I have long heard that the Moonflow clan's young master's divine path is unrivaled, so I came here to exchange pointers. Or, do the 9 clans of the Moonflow clan think that I am not qualified? Zhang Wu said in a low voice. As he finished speaking, the honest combat scripture revolved on its own. A brilliant divine king armor appeared on his body, outlining his heroic figure. As his cloak fluttered in the wind, he was like a majestic war god standing in front of everyone, giving off a sense of nobility. He is indeed the descendant of the war god king. The higher-ups of the 9 clans were deeply surprised. His aura, temperament, and even the will of the way that permeated the air. Especially the divine armor on Zhang Wu's body, it was not something that an ordinary person could wear. It was engraved with the aura of the God King. Obviously, it was a divine armor bestowed by the God King. Wearing this armor, Zhang Wu was almost equivalent to a divine prince. Then, according to this identity, he was indeed qualified to challenge Mochizuki. Okay, I will give you a chance. Yu Shangquan gritted his teeth and did not waste any time. He leaped up from his seat and landed on the training ground. The moment he landed, it was as if a heavy boulder had crashed into the ground, causing the training ground to tremble in a hazy manner. War God Clan, Zhang Wu. Perfect heavenly wheel, 5 lines divine veins. Please enlighten me. Zhang Wu reported his name and cultivation level. As he raised his hand, a dazzling heavenly wheel of fighting will bloomed. 5 divine veins that symbolized cultivation level circled around the edges of the heavenly wheel, emitting a divine light of fighting will. Suddenly, a wave of pressure descended on the training ground. Moon Flow Clan, Mochizuki. Perfect heavenly wheel, 6 lines divine veins. Mochizuki said coldly. Her eyes were slightly downcast. Similarly, she waved her hand behind her. Suddenly, a blazing light appeared on her body and gathered into the shape of a full moon, enveloping her. Under the moonlight, Mochizuki's body emitted an extremely strong burning aura. From afar, the swaying aura on her body was as terrifying as a divine fire. At this moment, the training ground quieted down. Qin Hao had fought all the way to the upper 9 clans. According to the report of the God clan of the lower worlds, it seemed that from the beginning to the end, he had not made a move. Now they had named Mochizuki and asked her to stand up. In the end, Qin Hao still did not make a move. Instead, he sent someone else to fight the Moon Flow clan's genius. And this person's identity was also extraordinary. He was the descendant of the divine warrior king. Mochizuki's aura was very terrifying. The blazing moon on his body burned with divine fire. However, his eyes gave people a feeling of coldness. He seemed to be very unhappy. He had already given Qin Hao a chance to challenge him. In the end, Qin Hao sent someone from the divine warrior clan. Facing Zhang Wu, Mochizuki could not refuse. If he refused, it would be disrespectful to the divine warrior king. Because of this, he was very unhappy. He wanted to refuse but could not. The opponent he wanted to defeat with his own hands was standing behind someone else and not coming out. Since you are not going to spar with Shangjiu, then let me be your opponent and learn a few moves from you. Zheng Huan held the astrolabe in his hand and took the initiative to walk towards Qin Hao. Qin Hao glanced over and said indifferently, "You are not my opponent." "Haha, we will only know after we try. Be careful." Zheng Huan straightened the astrolabe in his hand. His right finger absorbed a strand of divine power, and the astrolabe began to spin quickly. In an instant, a vision of heaven and earth appeared in the dojo. A majestic force shrouded down, mixed with a strange power. The scene began to change under the influence of this force. The stars moved and turned into a starry world. The dojo, even the platform, all disappeared. Whether it was Qin Hao, Zhang Wu, Mochizuki, or Zheng Huan, it was as if they were in a starry world. The high-level members of the 9 clans were all floating in this starry world. They were still in their original positions. The only thing that changed was the scene. However, at this time, Zheng Huan gave people the feeling that he was a god who controlled the galaxy. Within his will, everything had to follow his Tao. I said, "You are not my opponent." Qin Hao raised his hand lazily and pointed forward, pointing at where Zheng Huan was. I also said that we will only know after we try. Zheng Huan's face was serious. He moved the astrolabe in his hand. Suddenly, the starry sky changed greatly. Chapter 2278. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Manipulating the astrolabe and manipulating the universe, Zheng Huan's eyes flashed with golden light. He stood there with the astrolabe in his hand, as if he had transformed into an omnipotent starry god. He spat out a few sound waves in Qin Hao's direction, and the starlight in the sky flowed. Each of them exploded with extreme light, and at the same time, they streaked across the boundless night sky. Tens of millions of streams of starlight flew toward Qin Hao with a loud rumble. Along the way, the streams of starlight intersected and condensed into the starry sky halberd, the world-destroying divine saber, or the great path golden bell. With Zheng Huan's will, the universe that engulfed the dojo fell into a terrible riot. All the attacks in the sky were concentrated in one place, Qin Hao. At this moment, Qin Hao was seriously sizing up this chaotic universe and sensing the myriad of divine techniques that were formed within it, and he praised in his heart. As expected, there isn't a simple person amongst the descendants of the upper 9 clans. Zheng Huan's ability to control Tao insight is extremely exquisite, and it's extremely ingenious. While maintaining the starry sky grand Tao, he's still able to brew so many attacks from within the universe. Every single attack seems to be independent and boundlessly vast, yet they're interdependent with each other and conceal formations within them. This kind of control of the way was not something that ordinary people could achieve. Zheng Huan was worthy of the title of the perfect heaven's pride. What a pity! He was far from Qin Hao's strength. One day, when the little guy from Qilin Mountain grows up, I wonder if he can be like him. Facing the bombardment of the starlight and being under the influence of the universe, Qin Hao thought of Sherdong. Sherdong was the descendant of Shermu. The ability of his life spirit and the direction of his cultivation were surprisingly similar to Zheng Huan's. They both mastered the great path of the starry sky and were proficient in Taoist magic arts. This not only made him look forward to Sherdong's future. Qin Hao cleared his thoughts and focused his mind. In the next moment, a sharp light gathered at his fingertip. As a magnificent brilliance suddenly bloomed from his body, endless divine power poured into this finger. Swoosh! In an instant, a parallel line from Qin Hao's position went straight to Zheng Huan. When thousands of starlight fell, the light at his fingertip looked so small that it could almost be ignored. It was completely incomparable with the bright starry world. However, in the process of its flight, the falling stars, the halberd, and the saber light were all shattered. Wherever the light touched, all the magic was annihilated. Rumble! An enormous bang that shook the world resounded out, and the universe that was released by the righteous perfect Tao insight collapsed and ceased to exist along with this ray of light that flashed past. Suddenly, the scene was restored to its original appearance. When the broken hair fell from his earlobe, Zheng Huan held the astrolabe in his hand. His eyes were, for a long time, his eyes. For a long while, the light that penetrated the universe seemed to stars' world seemed the translation. The light that was, the star seemed, the light also seemed translation, God translation. One finger breaks all the magic. The corner of Zheng Huan's mouth trembled for a while. When he finished this sentence, he turned around silently and walked toward the seat of the God clan with disappointment. His back was particularly bleak. Qin Hao led people from the lower worlds all the way to the upper 9 layers. He had swept the 97th layer of the Chonghua divine realm, but he had never made a move. Therefore, Zheng Huan did not dare to underestimate Qin Hao's divine path ability. Before he insisted on making a move, he had already made up his mind to do his best. Even so, the ending he faced was still too cruel. He did not even see how many divine veins Qin Hao had when he released the celestial wheel, and his world of the Great Path was shattered by Qin Hao's finger. This was no longer a simple competition. The divine path of the two sides was not at the same level at all. It was no different from being crushed. Qin Hao did not lie to him. Zheng Huan was no match for him. Mad? Not mad. Proud? Not arrogant. He did not mean to belittle or despise the 9 clans. Qin Hao had this strength. He did not fight with the young people of the 9 clans because he stood in a higher position. If he really made a move, he would have fought from the lower worlds to the upper 9 layers of heaven and made a lot of noise along the way. That was what he called showing off. It was ridiculous that the 9 clans regarded others low-key as disrespect. They deceived themselves and fell into a good dream. They always thought that the descendants of the 9 clans were unparalleled in the world. Now, it was time to wake up from this dream that the 9 clans had woven. Zheng Huan left sadly, waking up all the white-bearded elders in the seats. They sat there in a daze. In addition to the shock on their faces, they seemed to be at a loss. They did not even know where to put their hands and feet. How could this be? The perfect heavens chosen one of the God clan, with 50,000 years of cultivation, only needed one finger to. Didn't the Moonflow Divine Knight say that Qin Hao had just entered the divine path and only had one divine vein? It's only been 1,000 years. How could he grow to this level? At this moment, the expressions on the faces of the 9 clans were extremely interesting. The facial features of the old men were distorted and extremely ugly. The intelligence was wrong, the intelligence was wrong. They also knew that Qin Hao had a primal chaos divine tool, the Samsara mirror. He could borrow the samsara of the primordial chaos great Tao to deepen his cultivation on the divine path. But in a mere 7 years, he had grown to such astonishing strength. This was truly beyond their expectations. Even Yu Shintian's face twisted. His wine cup hung in the air, but he did not bring it to his mouth. God Lord Zhonghua and God Lord Moonflow had extremely grave expressions. Perhaps the elders of the various clans had not clearly seen Qin Hao's heavenly wheel divine vein, but the 3 of them had seen through it. The moment he defeated Zheng Huan, they had seen 7 rays of light revolving around Qin Hao's heavenly wheel. 70,000 years of cultivation. In 1,000 years, the strength of one bloodline had increased by leaps and bounds to 7 bloodlines. Even in the eyes of these so-called gods, it could be said to be a miracle. Primal chaos divine tools truly are endlessly mysterious. God Lord Moonflow muttered, his eyes turning even colder. Given the strength of Qin Hao's finger, let alone Zheng Huan, even his son, Mochizuki, would find it very difficult to resist. It was no wonder that Qin Hao had no intention of sparring with Mochizuki. Perhaps he had long ago believed that the supreme prodigy of the Moonflow race was no match for him. Primal chaos divine tools are the same as God Kings. They are formed from the essence of the primordial chaos Tao and contain the most primordial energy. Although this little scoundrel used a divine tool to increase his cultivation, it's not hard to see that he must have suffered a great deal, God Lord Zhonghua said. God Lord Zhonghua said, there was no such thing as sitting back and reaping the fruits of others' labor in this world. For equivalent benefits, one had to pay a corresponding price. Perhaps Qin Hao had endured several life and death tribulations. Shintian, this primal chaos divine tool is priceless. What do you think? God Lord Moonflow suddenly asked Yu Shintian. That's mine. Yu Shintian didn't even think about it as he drained the cup of immortal jade in his hand. God Lord Moonflow moved his gaze away, a look of displeasure on his face. This, is it true? Xiao Han stared unblinkingly at the silver-haired youth. Was that really her man? The Qin Hao who had been powerless to fight back against Jun Mo and was almost certain to die in the hands of the Heavenly Mandate Army? If it's true, I guarantee a replacement. Forget it, I can't afford it. Yu Yuanjin munched on melon seeds as he nudged Xiao Han with his elbow. My dear niece, you're dumbfounded, aren't you? To tell the truth, I was also very shocked when I learned of Jun Mo's death, but now that I think about it, if your man didn't have such a cultivation level, how could he have been able to kill a god king's son? Chapter 2279. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Yuanjin, did you see how many divine veins he has? Yu Yuanyu's eyes were no longer as excited as before. Instead, they were filled with shock. Even she couldn't see through Qin Hao's divine path cultivation. 7 divine veins, 70,000 years of cultivation. His target isn't Mochizuki, but the Qing Shaoqing Emperor at the 98th level. Yu Yuanjin's face showed a rare hint of seriousness. Before he came, he still had some doubts about what Qin Hao could rely on to compete with the Chongqing clan. Now, his doubts were gone. 70,000 years of cultivation, then his next step will be. The shock in Xiao Han's eyes grew thicker and thicker. He subconsciously looked at his uncle next to him. Yu Yuanjin had comprehended the exquisite Immortal Sutra at 70,000 years, and had broken through the divine path first and stepped into the great god realm. Yes, if my son-in-law is lucky, he should have a chance to cultivate the second part of the exquisite Immortal Sutra, Yu Yuanjin said solemnly. This was the privilege of being a son-in-law of the Moonflow clan. He could enjoy the teachings of the Immortal King. Otherwise, the Moonflow clan wouldn't deliberately make things difficult for others and interfere with the marriage of the women in the clan. After all, once an outsider entered the Moonflow clan, he would be considered one of them and could enjoy all the fortunes of the clan. As for those below the 97th level, basically, the Xiaohe clan and the Zhenghe clan didn't marry outsiders. In fact, the Moonflow clan had relaxed the requirements for son-in-law. But if Qin Hao wanted to comprehend the scripture written by the Immortal King, he had to have the ability to stay and get the approval of the Moonflow clan elders. Therefore, the upcoming battle with the Chongqing clan was very important. Not only was it related to reuniting with Xiao Han, but it was also related to Qin Hao's future. If he could comprehend the will of the great god from the Immortal Sutra, it would be a great thing for Qin Hao. In the arena, after Qin Hao defeated Jinghuan with a single finger, the Taihe clan of the 96th heaven had completely abandoned the idea of sending someone to fight. Jinghuan Divine Path's cultivation was not weak. He was on the same level as the young master of the Taihe Divine clan. He could not even withstand a single finger. It was conceivable that if Taihe Divine's son went, he could only leave in disappointment and sorrow. With that thought in mind, the upper echelons of the 9 clans all looked towards a certain location. Sitting there was a true monstrous genius from the 98th heaven. He was the son of Chonghua, the grandson of an immortal monarch, the most unique and noble existence among the 9 clans. Zhongqing was different from the perfect celestial wheel of the 9 ancient clans. He inherited the innate primordial power of the Immortal King and was a direct descendant of the Immortal King. Even Yu Shangqing, Mochizuki, and Yu Yuanjin were inferior to him. This had nothing to do with cultivation, but the difference in the origin. Chongqing could be said to be the true Prince of God. He was comparable to Jun Mo's God-King bloodline. Qin Hao was so powerful that he defeated Zheng Huan with a single finger. It was the first time he showed his unparalleled power in front of the upper echelons of the 9 clans. If they wanted to crush this person, Zhongqing would have to do it. However, when the elders of the 9 clans looked over with anticipation, they found that Zhongqing's expression was extraordinarily calm. It was as if Qin Hao's actions just now did not attract his attention. Now, Zhongqing was staring at Zhan Wu and Mochizuki in the arena. Compared with Qin Hao, it seemed that the competition between Zhan Wu and Mochizuki was more interesting to Zhongqing. You are indeed the descendant of an immortal king. You are so calm and collected. Speaking of which, compared to young lord, us old men seem to be lacking in temperament. We're ashamed. Qin Hao's cultivation of the divine path is indeed extraordinary. His finger just now can explain why he could go all the way to the upper 9 heavens. The divine lord of the lower world has an incomplete heavenly wheel. His cultivation is probably not as good as his. Yes, it would be more embarrassing if he couldn't stop him. Even if he won, it would be unfair. You're thinking too much. When the perfect heavens wheel explodes, he can surpass 2 to 3 levels to fight against a celestial level expert. He defeated Zheng Huan, who has cultivated for 50,000 years, with a single finger. At the very least, he has 6 vein meridians. With this kind of combat power, how many divine masters in the lower world can resist him? The elders of the 9 clans were discussing this. Not to mention the divine master, even the elders of the perfect branch might not have many people who could defeat Qin Hao. Now, they could only hope that the young master would make a move. After all, it would not be appropriate for the elders to make a move. The situation would be very awkward. However, Zhongqing did not seem to care much about Qin Hao. In fact, this was normal. No matter how strong Qin Hao was, he was still an acquired perfect cultivator. How could he be compared with Zhongqing, who was born perfect? When the young lord made his move, the person who left the stage in a lonely manner should have been Qin Hao. Thinking about it, it was quite funny. Haha, no wonder he is so confident. His cultivation should be above mine. Mochizuki glanced at Qin Hao and then looked back at Zhan Wu. Seeing Qin Hao defeat Zheng Huan with a single finger, Mochizuki felt a little emotional. Now that he thought about it, even without Xiao Han, Qin Hao was qualified to challenge him. However, Mochizuki's opponent now was Zhan Wu. Even if he wanted to fight with Qin Hao, he had to defeat this person from the War God clan first. Give up the fantasy in your heart. The person who can defeat him is not Zhongqing, and it will not be you. Zhan Wu's pure gold boots took a step forward, and the rolling fighting intent particles rolled up along the floor. From the beginning to the end, the only one who had the chance to defeat Qin Hao was him. The battle between him and Qin Hao when they were young was not over yet. Gotcha! The battle intent light swept over like twisted lightning, shattering the stone slabs along the way. Mochizuki smiled. How could a 5-meridian divine power defeat him with 60,000 years of cultivation? This black man from the War God clan underestimated the young master of the Moon Flow clan too much. Blazing, moonlight sky blast. Mochizuki stepped forward. His body spun and one leg swept forward. The blazing moonlight on his body exploded. A layer of crescent-shaped fire wave rushed up, colliding with the battle-intent light wave in front of him. In an instant, a deafening roar came from the training ground. A terrifying crack appeared from the center. The platform broke and tilted to the two sides. At the same time, Zhan Wu and Mochizuki rose up at the same time. They each formed a fist and met in midair. As the two fists collided, the terrifying battle-intent light wave mixed with sparks swept out. Visible cracks appeared in the void. As expected of a connate life form, Qin Hao looked up. Mochizuki's fist intent was strong enough to fight head-on with Zhan Wu. This situation was rare. However, it was just the beginning. The terrifying thing about the War God clan was that their battle intent would rise steadily. No one knew how many waves of attacks Mochizuki could withstand from Zhan Wu in the end. Powerful! This is the battle intent of the War God clan. What a domineering aura! In the training ground, the juniors of the 9 clans all stood up and focused on this battle. Their eyes flashed, afraid to miss any details. The War God clan, the descendant of the War God King, Mochizuki, the Khanate descendant of the Moonflow clan. Both of their Tao wills contained the power of the primordial world. Such a pure battle was rare even in the untainted perfect wheel. It was not inferior to the battle between the divine princes. Twilight War God, please do your best. Xiao Han had seen Qin Hao defeat Jing Huan, who had 50,000 years of cultivation, with a single finger. The worry in her heart lessened a lot. Now, she gradually immersed herself in the Tao battle and had the heart to watch. Twilight War God, after Dendi of the East Continent, was another legend of the divine wilderness continent. Xiao Han knew that Zhan Wu's celestial source was not from the divine wilderness, but she still hoped to see Zhan Wu's glory. Even against a Khanate god clan like the Moonflow clan, the Twilight War God had to be as strong as ever. Only then would he be worthy of Zhan Wu's title. Chapter 2280. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Great Annihilation. As the two fists collided, the power of precepts rumbled in the air. The fist force released by Zhan Wu and Mochizuki was extremely terrifying. It seemed to have surpassed the power of an ordinary perfect Tianluan. Apart from those with the bloodline of the Divine King, under the condition that their cultivation levels were at the same level, an ordinary perfect Tianluan would find it difficult to withstand this kind of attack. At this moment, rolling heat flowed out from Mochizuki's Tianluan, turning into a golden-red liquid that gradually covered his entire body. Wherever it touched, the liquid condensed into an armor that emitted a blazing golden-red divine light. It looked abnormally sturdy. The corner of Mochizuki's mouth curled up into a smile. He stepped forward, and his vigorous divine power shook Zhan Wu's shoulder, causing him to retreat in the air. Immediately, he raised his palm high, and a dazzling stream of light converged into a crescent halberd that was the same color as the armor on his body. When he slashed down, a sharp golden-red light blade was drawn, slashing straight towards Zhan Wu. This guy, what an arrogant battle stance! Alu had followed Qin Hao all the way from the lower worlds to the upper 9 layers. Including the disciples of the 9 clans, there were hundreds of divine clans in the heavy glory divine realm. None of them were like Mochizuki, whose every move was filled with aggression. He always took the initiative and firmly held the initiative in his own hand. Colorless, silent. Zhan Wu silently recited the incantation of the unexpected battle scripture, and the War God clan's mantra circulated in his body. He immediately abandoned his sight and hearing. When he raised his head again, Mochizuki's golden-red light blade had already lost its original color. When it landed in Zhan Wu's eyes, it was like a primitive attack that had shed its gorgeous appearance, leaving behind a simple skeleton. Moreover, the sound of cutting through space and the sharp sound had all disappeared. Dong! Zhan Wu stomped heavily on the air with his right foot, creating a layer of ripples. Rolling battle-will particles meandered along his legs, and the godly king armor on his body became even brighter. He raised his hand, and a huge gold-plated fist flew out from his body. With a loud clang, a blinding divine light exploded. When this fist bounced off the crescent battle halberd, it actually sent Mochizuki flying. Good fight! He's still able to do this even though his divine power is weaker by one lineage. At the seats of the 9 clans, the young men and women who were watching the battle were all cheering. With the same level of cultivation, it was not easy to take a direct hit from Mochizuki. Moreover, Zhan Wu, whose divine power was weaker by one lineage, was able to send him flying. Of course, the juniors of the 9 clans knew in their hearts that this effect originated from Zhan Wu's bloodline power. After all, he was the descendant of the innate god of war. I don't like to test the waters, and I don't like to play tricks. When fighting, one should be hot-blooded and charge forward. My every attack will be stronger than the last. Little master of the Moon Flow clan, be careful. Zhan Wu's style was so direct. If he attacked forcefully, he would attack all the way until he defeated his opponent. In between his words, he gave up on feeling. Ignorance. Giving up on feeling. Indifferent to pain and itch. Let the opponent's flesh and blood splatter. My will to fight is burning. Boom. A golden torrent gushed out from Zhan Wu's fist. It was no longer in the form of particles. Instead, it was completely solidified. Like a pillar of light, it chased after Mochizuki, who was flying diagonally. Mochizuki felt the aura of this attack. Her frivolous face finally changed. She steadied herself, and at the same time, the crescent divine halberd in her hand swept out rays of half-moon light, bombarding the golden torrent. However, it could not stop Zhan Wu's attack. Roar! Mochizuki roared. Her eyes were burning with red flames. She was like a wild beast that was about to go berserk. She stared at Zhan Wu's fist light. Just as it was about to reach her, Mochizuki suddenly turned into a ball of flames. Borrowing the innate blazing moon form, she resisted the attack. Then, a sharp golden-red light blade slashed out from the flames, cutting Zhan Wu's fist light into two. This halberd was like a hot knife through butter. It pressed down on Zhan Wu's real body. At the same time, Mochizuki roared, "Then let me tell you. I have always been the one suppressing others. You are no exception." The halberd light was sharp and unstoppable. It was like the moonlight cutting into the mortal world. Nothing could stop it. Mochizuki pressed all the way to Zhan Wu. The corner of her mouth rose, revealing an arrogant smile. Bang! What greeted Mochizuki's smiling face was a heavy fist with a sturdy glove. Zhan Wu gave up on hearing. Although he saw Mochizuki's ferocious face and her mouth moving, he didn't know what she was saying. Now, Zhan Wu's mind was only filled with battle. This punch landed on Yu Shangquan's face, causing his head to involuntarily twist to the side. His body was sent flying for the second time. His mind was in a mess, and he felt as if his brain had turned into a pot of porridge. The bones in his body were under the impact of the law of fighting will, and there was a faint cracking sound. Seeing this scene, many of the young people from the 9 clans shrank their neck. It was as if they were the ones who were hit. They felt a burning sensation on their faces and couldn't bear to watch. This punch wasn't light. At least, Mochizuki's face was disfigured. Damn it! Mochizuki cursed angrily. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. Half of her face gradually swelled. She looked at Zhan Wu with disgust. Was the War God clan all so boorish? Blazing moon fall. She raised the crescent halberd in her hand. The power of the will of the Wei radiated toward the 9 heavens. In an instant, with Mochizuki as the core, the void completely turned into a burning sea. The burning air surged. High in the sky, many blazing moons formed. It was as if countless blazing suns were born out of thin air. Terrifying magma flowed on them. Then, Mochizuki's halberd pointed at Zhan Wu. The void rumbled and shook. The blazing moons wrapped in magma crazily fell down. They fell toward Zhan Wu's position collectively, wanting to bury and burn him. No thought. Zhan Wu silently chanted. Then, he used his will of the will. Along with this, the surging battle will on his body became even brighter. Invisibly, the aura made his figure bigger. He was like an ancient god standing under the burning sea. Boom, 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 boom. The blazing moons with magma rained down one after another. Every one of them shattered on top of Zhan Wu's head. Above him, the fighting will interweaved to form an invisible wall of air, attempting to block the attacks. However, Mochizuki was different from other perfect heavenly wheels in the end. Moreover, she had 6 divine veins and had the additional divine power of Zhan Wu's divine veins. After blocking more than 10 blazing moons, that formless chi wall of battle will collapsed. countless raging flames slanted onto Zhan Wu's body, instantly turning him into a burning man. At the same time, the falling blazing moons did not stop. They continued to fall and hit their target. They fell on Zhan Wu's head, causing his body to sway. As expected of the 97th layer, young Lord Yu Lu. Although the Battle God clan's battle intent is incomparably ferocious, the difference between the cultivation of this clan still exists. Isn't that a little cruel? It's better to let the opponent suffer cruelty than to suffer it yourself. Seeing that Mochizuki had suppressed Zhan Wu, the elders of the 9 clans smiled for the first time. They had been sullen for too long. In this battle, they could finally hold their heads high. Look, his will of Tao doesn't seem to have weakened. In fact, it feels even stronger. A youth of the 9 clans pointed at Zhan Wu, who was covered in raging flames. At this moment, the blazing moons that were brighter than the sun continued to fall. Every one of them landed on Zhan Wu's head, accompanied by a soul-stirring explosion, causing him to stumble. However, the divine will that pervaded his body did not weaken under Mochizuki's attacks. Just as the youth of the 9 clans had said, it continued to strengthen instead. It was closing in on Mochizuki, who was releasing divine technique. Was he still human? Did he not know what pain was? Mochizuki also noticed the abnormality. Her pupils shrank, and her gaze became sharper. She clenched her teeth so hard that they trembled slightly. She thought to herself that the Battle God clan was indeed a clan of gods that worshipped battle the most. After being bombarded by his divine techniques, it was as if he was an outsider and did not feel any pain at all. From Zhan Wu's determined gaze, it could be seen that his target was always Mochizuki. What pain! What attack! As long as he was still standing, as long as he could move, he would close in on his enemy. It had to be said that this fearless aura deeply shocked the hearts of the 9 clans' youths. Unknowingly, it also made everyone feel a sense of terror. Especially Mochizuki. Although she looked like she did not care, when she saw Zhan Wu closing in on her like a monster under the bombardment of divine techniques, an uncontrollable shadow appeared in Mochizuki's heart. Great art of annihilation. It was unknown whether it was nervousness or eagerness to win, but Mochizuki only wanted to end the battle with Zhan Wu as soon as possible. She raised her head and let out a cry. That solemn and stirring sound wave made it seem as if she was the one who was being bombarded by the divine techniques. It gave others an absurd feeling that Zhan Wu had the upper hand. The crescent divine halberd in her hand was raised high into the sky. The sea of scorching heat around her condensed into thousands of streams of lava and gathered on the divine halberd. Mochizuki's Tianlun also erupted with the most resplendent radiance. The 6 divine veins on the edges lit up at the same time. It was as if she wanted to pour all of her strength into this move. She wanted to crush the monster that was constantly approaching her to the ground and make him unable to crawl up again. Boom! A ball of moonlight condensed on the divine halberd. The Xiantian descendant activated the perfect Tianlun. She completely released her 60,000 years of cultivation and gathered the most ferocious attack of the Blazing Moon clan. Great art of annihilation. Qin Hao looked up at the sky. He felt the waves of precepts coming from Mochizuki's halberd light. His expression turned serious. If this divine technique were to come down, its power would not be ordinary. It would not be inferior to the will of the divine king that Jun Mo had used on him. According to Zhan Wu's current cultivation, he did not know if he could withstand it. However, before coming here, Zhan Wu had taken the goal of defeating Mochizuki on himself. At this time, he could only trust him. Uncle. Xiao Han nervously tugged at Yu Yuanjin's clothes. Yu Yuanjin's eyes were solemn. He said, "Don't worry. I will take care of him." If Zhan Wu could not withstand it, he would step in and end the battle. But in that way, Qin Hao's morale would be damaged. Lie down obediently. Mochizuki roared. Her eyes were filled with anger. The halberd in her hand activated the blazing moon annihilation. She used all her strength to attack Zhan Wu. Zhan Wu still walked forward. Lava dripped from his body. Many thumb-sized holes were burned in the armor of the God King. When he had been forced out of the Archean realm by the Tianzhou clan, the God King of War had given him this armor to protect his divine spirit. The armor of the God King had merged with Zhan Wu's will. If he was strong, the armor would be strong. If he was weak, the armor would be weak. In fact, it was not difficult to see that in terms of divine path cultivation, Mochizuki could already threaten Zhan Wu. Chapter 2281. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. No heart, no spirit. Zhan Wu's battle intent surged as he channeled the honest battle scripture. Zhan Wu's madness reached the highest level he had ever reached in his life. A majestic figure vaguely appeared in his eyes, and the divine radiance imprint of the war god race appeared on his forehead. His head was slightly raised, and his posture was tall and straight. He allowed the magma to wrap around and burn him, and his arrogance was unparalleled. Boom! Dazzling golden divine light radiated, and the phantom of a war god enveloped Zhan Wu, exuding a domineering aura. At this moment, it was as if Zhan Wu had been possessed by the war god tribe's ancestor, and he had transformed into an ancient war god. Countless bolts of lightning intertwined on his enormous phantom, causing the phantom of a giant to be filled with shocking power. Honest Battle Scripture's Profundity, End of Chaos. Zhan Wu opened his hand and grabbed toward the top of his head. Boundless divine power surged out from his heavenly wheel and condensed into a dazzling golden sun in his palm. He roared and clenched his hand into a fist, slamming it heavily on the dazzling sun. The dazzling sun let out a sharp whistle and flew wildly. It condensed into an unstoppable sharp arrow midway and collided with Mochizuki's blazing moon divine technique. Boom! This attack caused a turbulent shockwave to spread from the 97th heaven all the way to the lower realm. The entire glorious reincarnation divine realm shook, and even the supreme 99th heaven, the pinnacle of the immortal king realm, trembled. Mochizuki's eyes were bloodshot as she roared angrily. She threw the crescent divine halberd in her hand toward the gradually splitting blazing moon. The instant the blazing moon was pierced by the dazzling golden arrow, the two sides collided for the second time and exploded into light waves that filled the sky. Poof! The descendants of the 9 clans who had weaker foundations felt their chests churn as the two sides collided. Blood mixed with wine spurted out pathetically, and their divine senses fell into chaos. When the higher-ups of the 9 clans saw this, they successively released the energy of Tao insights to descend onto the juniors and protect the divine senses of their children. Only then did the warped expressions of those young men and young women calm down, and their gazes were filled with astonishment as they looked at the two figures that stood towering in the sky above the Tao square. Break! Mochizuki gave it her all. She controlled the halberd with her spiritual will. The halberd collided with the arrow, and the friction produced violent sparks. Traces of blood gradually seeped out from the corner of Zhan Wu's mouth. He silently took out the sunset divine bow, pulled the bowstring with his left hand, and pulled the bowstring with his right hand. The cloak behind him fluttered wildly as he released an arrow into the air. As the bowstring vibrated, an invisible chi arrow seemed to pierce through space and entered the radiant gold arrow. The arrow instantly exploded with an even more blinding light. An unparalleled battle intent mixed with purple lightning spread across the crescent divine halberd. Only a click sound was heard. The halberd cracked, shattered, and slowly melted before everyone's eyes. Whoosh! This arrow was headed straight for Mochizuki. Dragging along the purple-gold lightning, it drew a beautiful arc in the air. Mochizuki's hair was disheveled as he floated in his original position. His face revealed a desolate expression. Now that he had exhausted all his strength, The heavenly wheel had returned to his body due to the exhaustion of his divine power. How could he block this arrow? He had lost 60,000 years of divine power, lost to 50,000 years of divine power. He was a high and mighty heaven's pride of the 97th heaven, the descendant of the innate Hongming lifeforms. Even though he had the advantage in terms of cultivation, he had lost to someone from the divine race who was inferior to him. How humiliating! How sorrowful! He was so ashamed that he could not show his face. Yu Shangjiang silently closed his eyes. He felt that everyone from the 9 clans was looking at him. Those doubtful and disappointed gazes made him feel so ashamed that he had nowhere to hide. At this moment, Qin Hao's face suddenly appeared in his mind. Mochizuki's heart trembled slightly as he recalled the scene before he fought with Zhan Wu. At that time, he was so proud that he thought that Qin Hao would not be able to last more than 10 moves in his hand. This was an analysis that he made after he overestimated Qin Hao's abilities. In fact, he thought that he only needed 5 moves to make Qin Hao roll out of the magnificent divine realm and never dare to see Xiao Han again. But now, it seemed that the person who was overestimated was him, Mochizuki. He did not even have the chance to fight with Qin Hao before he was defeated by someone beside Qin Hao. Where was his dignity left? Subconsciously, Mochizuki suddenly had the thought of killing himself. But he quickly recovered. When he opened his eyes again, the dazzling gold arrow that was about to enter his eyes had already disappeared. He smiled bitterly at Zhan Wu, turned around silently, and left the training hall with his head lowered. He did not return to his seat. Instead, he left directly. Perhaps in this life, he would never appear before Xiao Han and Qin Hao again. This, go up lost. The elders of the 9 races were all stunned. They had thought of the worst outcome. After all, the war gods were not easy to deal with. But the worst-case scenario was a draw. They never thought that they would lose. At this moment, the elders of the 9 races suddenly realized that they did not even know how to speak. Go up. Yu Shangqing stared at the departing figure, his eyes brimming with pain. 60,000 years of divine Tao had lost to 50,000 years of divine Tao. This battle was undoubtedly a major blow to his younger brother. Let him calm down. Zhongqing poured himself a cup of tea and drained it in one gulp. In the end, go up is too conceited. Yu Shangqing understood his younger brother far too well, but this battle had nothing to do with conceit. Mochizuki had lost to Zhan Wu, and the war gods were truly the most outstanding fighting god race. They could be described as terrifying. This was an unfair victory. The 3 gods were seated on the main seats, and God Lord Munflo's eyes were tinged with rage as he coldly spat out these words. At the final juncture, Zhan Wu had taken out a divine artifact to assist him. Otherwise, how could he have broken the Tao halberd? A loss is a loss. Go up is truly inferior, God Lord Moonflow said. Zhan Wu had borrowed the power of a divine tool, and he also had the divine armor that the divine king had bestowed upon him, so he was not afraid of being burned by the blazing moon. Wasn't Yu Shangho the same? In their first clash, Mochizuki had summoned the moon armor, and the crescent halberd was also a divine tool. It had fused with her Tao intent and transformed into a halberd. Thus, this battle had actually been very fair. At this moment, all was silent. The upper echelon members of the 9 races stared at the destroyed Tao platform in a daze, their hearts filled with a myriad of emotions. They were truly disappointed in Mochizuki, but they also understood that Mochizuki had done her best, but she had not been able to defeat her opponent. With a wah sound, Zhan Wu spat out a mouthful of blood from his throat. The blood that he spat out was emitting a terrifying heat. When it floated down, it even burned through the space. He was not unharmed in this battle. In fact, he had suffered serious injuries. His 5 viscera and 6 bowels were almost burned through. Zhan Wu raised his hand and wiped the corner of his mouth. Soon after, His body floated down and quietly returned to Qin Hao's side. "You're pushing it a little too far." Qin Hao felt that Zhan Wu's fighting style was too rigid and that there was no need to take his opponent's divine technique head-on. His palm, wreathed in divine light, was pressed against Zhan Wu's shoulder. Zhan Wu waved his hand to knock away Qin Hao's palm and said, "There's no need to waste divine power on me. There's an even stronger one coming up next. That's your true target." Zhan Wu had never believed that his fighting style was rigid. This was called standing still and responding to all movements. It was the most effective and direct method to defeat his opponent. His mission was complete, but Qin Hao still faced an even greater obstacle. Through his battle with Mochizuki, Zhan Wu understood the true strength of the 9 races. The lower worlds were one level, the upper 7 were another, and the Moonflow race and Chonghua race were the truly powerful existences. Mochizuki was truly powerful, and from this, Zhongqing was even more frightening than Mochizuki. This had nothing to do with their cultivation, but the difference in their innate Dao intents. Zhongqing's Dao had inherited the innate God King's Dao, and Chonghua's Grand Dao. Just what sort of extreme mysteries did he possess? Qin Hao nodded and pulled back his hand. He turned to the upper echelon members of the 9 races and said, "Ah Wu won by a fluke. This battle has allowed us to clearly see just how extraordinary the true geniuses of the 9 races are. They are truly worthy of respect." God Lord Moonflow turned his face to the side in displeasure. Today should have been his son's stage, but now it was Qin Hao's group that had benefited. "Little scoundrel, it seems like you came prepared." God Lord Chonghua chuckled as he looked down at his son, Zhongqing. Zhongqing silently got up, straightened his clothes, and leapt off his seat. Just as he was about to land on the Dao platform, the shattered Dao platform miraculously healed, the holes of all sizes wiping away. It was as clean as a jade wall, perfect as it had ever been. Qin Hao smiled at God Lord Chonghua, knowing that this was all God Chonghua's handiwork. He walked up to Zhongqing and cupped his fist. "I presume that this is Lord Zhongqing of the 98th heaven, the grandson of the immortal king, Your Highness Zhongqing." Zhongqing froze for a moment, and then he glanced in a certain direction. He saw that Yu Yuanjin was eating and drinking to his heart's content, not caring one bit about Mochizuki's defeat. Zhongqing inwardly gave Yu Yuanjin a scornful middle finger. "It seems like Yuanjin has already divulged the true situation of the upper 9 races to you. No wonder you didn't want to fight with him," Zhongqing said. It was precisely because he had learned about the upper 9 races from Yu Yuanjin that Qin Hao was certain that Mochizuki was no match for him. Based on this conjecture, it was not difficult for Zhongqing to see that Qin Hao's cultivation was above Mochizuki's. At the very least, they were on the same level. Uncle did speak a little about the situation of the upper 9 races, but he did not reveal the Dao intent that the upper 9 races are skilled in, Qin Hao admitted. Addressing Yu Yuanjin as uncle made the elders of the upper 9 races rather uncomfortable. "Phew!" Zhongqing exhaled, nodded, and chuckled. "I understand. So your target this time was me. Originally, I didn't want to participate in today's Dao battle. Even though Father used the honor of the Chinese race to force me, I still didn't want to fight, but..." Zhongqing scanned the faces of Qin Hao and Zhan Wu behind him. "All of you swept your way here and defeated the prodigies of the upper 9 races one after another. I, Zhongqing, had no choice but to step forward. This has nothing to do with Xiaohan. I never had any intention of marrying her. Earlier, God Lord Chonghua truly had oppressed Zhongqing, and even now, his thoughts had not changed. He would not admire Xiaohan because of who she was or how talented she was. He could only admire her. Admiration was one thing, but he would never marry a woman he had no feelings for. Besides, this woman had married someone else and was no longer a virgin. Zhongqing would never marry her. The upper echelon members of the upper 9 races grimaced at these words, and God Lord Chonghua also appeared surprised. It turned out that his son had agreed to come to the Tao Temple of the upper 9 races, but still had no intention of participating in the Tao battle. Xiao Han inwardly breathed a sigh of relief at Zhongqing's words. Although it's a good thing, why does it sound so unpleasant to the ears? Yu Yuanyu was displeased, as if Xiao Han was not worthy of Zhongqing. Haha, young Lord Qing is truly extraordinary. Alas, even if you want to marry Han you won't be able to, because there is no one else in this world who is worthy of her. Qin Hao took a step forward and stared at Zhongqing. The two of them had been smiling this entire time, but there was a thick smell of gunpowder between them. 98 Young Lord Zhongqing. Perfect heavenly wheel and 7-vein divine vein. Please enlighten me. Zhongqing gestured for him to attack first. Primeval Realms Pill Sovereign Clan, Qin Hao. Perfect heavenly wheel and 7-vein divine vein. Please enlighten me, young Lord Qing. Qin Hao reported his cultivation and his own situation. His words caused a huge stir in the Tao Temple, and the god lords of the upper 9 races all paled. Chapter 2282. 7 Meridians of Divine Energy was not shocking in the first place. In the 98 layers heaven of the glory divine realm, there were many who had reached 7 meridians of divine energy or even surpassed it. But in the short span of 1,000 years, going from 1 meridian of the divine Tao to 7 meridians of divine energy was an extremely exaggerated and shocking development. Upon hearing Qin Hao's words, Moon Shintian's heart trembled, shock appearing on his face for the first time. Was this the supreme fortune that the primal chaos divine artifact, the mirror of samsara, had brought to Qin Hao? If this was true, then the sacrifices the gods of the sword world had made back then had been worth it. At this moment, the heat in God Lord Munflo's eyes grew even more obvious. He turned to Moon Shintian with an urgent and restrained expression, as if he had something extremely important to discuss with him. But Moon Shintian withdrew his surprise and returned to normal. God Lord Moonflow swallowed back the words he wanted to say. He inwardly sneered. Given the pride in Moon Shintian's bones, he would never agree to exchange Xiao Han for Qin Hao's mirror of samsara. But things were different for God Lord Moonflow. If he agreed to let Qin Hao join the Moonflow clan and acknowledge him as their son-in-law, the 97 layers heaven would firmly control the mirror of samsara. To the Moon clan, this would undoubtedly be an opportunity to revitalize their clan. Alas, Moon Shintian was too proud and would never express any goodwill to Qin Hao. He would not even put on a pretense. Mother, uncle, is this true? Xiao Han's heart was in turmoil. How could she dare to imagine Qin Hao's cultivation level? 7 meridians of divine energy. She had come to the glory divine realm, undergone 2 God King samsara tribulations, and undergone nirvana of her divine origin, barely forming 3 meridians of divine energy. Compared to Qin Hao's 70,000 years of cultivation, Xiao Han's 3 meridians divine power was too weak. She was once again left far behind by that bastard. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't catch up to Qin Hao. Shame, joy, heartache, and a little self-blame. Xiao Han's feelings were very complicated. She could completely imagine how much hardship Qin Hao had suffered after he was forced out of the sword realm for the sake of the 7 meridians divine powers. It should be true. He wouldn't lie to the 9 clans. The battle between him and Chongqing is going to be even more exciting. Actually, I also want to see what level this brat's mastery of the divine Tao is at. Yu Yuanjin patted off the food residue on his hand and wiped it on his clothes. When he looked down, he became extremely solemn. He had to watch this battle carefully. What kind of divine Tao level could kill Junimo, who was the divine prince? Moreover, Chongqing was also very powerful. After becoming an immortal king, Chongqing's innate Tao was extremely terrifying. If their cultivation levels were at the same level, Yu Yuanjin asked himself, he would have less than a 50% chance of winning against Chongqing. Then, how could Qin Hao defeat Chongqing, who was also a 7 meridians divine power? Yu Yuanyu held Xiaohan's hands and patted them twice. Looking at his excited and nervous daughter, he comforted her, "Don't worry. Since he dared to cross the eldritch wilderness with your uncle, he must have some confidence in himself." This battle could be said to be a battle between Tao insights at the peak of the ascension stage, and the mother and daughter were of no help. If Qin Hao wanted to obtain the recognition of the Moonflow clan, then he had to surmount the hurdle of young monarch Qing. The higher-ups of the 9 clans focused their attention on the center of the Taoist field again. Everyone looked extremely solemn. This battle wasn't just a simple exchange of pointers. Chongqing represented the dignity of the divine Tao of the entire Glory Divine Realm. He was the flag of the Glory Divine Realm and couldn't be defeated. The other divine princes couldn't, and Qin Hao couldn't either. I'm very curious now. What kind of heaven-defying fortune does the reincarnation mirror have? Chongqing's eyes were very sincere. He didn't know if he would be lucky enough to experience it personally. Let's not talk about success or failure. After this battle, Prince Qin will have a chance to try. Qin Hao responded. Chongqing was a person covered in a halo, and the sense of honor in his bones was extremely strong. Thus, he gave others an innate sense of nobility and pride. But Qin Hao actually understood that as Chongqing's position, he had no choice but to be proud. After all, he represented the strongest natural Tao insight in the entire divine layer realm. In essence, Chongqing was a very honest person, unlike Jun Mo, who was hypocritical and treacherous. At least, Qin Hao didn't hate Chongqing. The grandson of the immortal king wanted to see the reincarnation mirror. As a guest of the Glory Divine Realm, Qin Hao naturally couldn't refuse. "Thank you." Chongqing clasped his fist at Qin Hao gratefully. He wanted to break through the 100,000-year threshold of the divine Tao. It was not enough to rely on his own strength. If he could get a glimpse of the divine Tao from the reincarnation Taoist field, it would be a great help. After he finished speaking, Chongqing raised 2 of his fingers and a folding fan appeared at his fingertip. He reminded Qin Hao, "Be careful." He held the folding fan and waved it forward. Suddenly, several balls of vigorous Gang Qi roared and blasted forward. The balls of divine light that appeared out of thin air gathered into a dazzling whirlwind. When he suddenly attacked, it showed that Chongqing was extraordinary. He hadn't opened his heavenly wheel and didn't even need to accumulate divine power. He could control his divine will freely with his mind. It was obvious that he had surpassed Mochizuki's divine Tao level. Qin Hao smiled and raised his sword finger and waved it forward. The sound of swords was heard all around him. Several flying swords appeared with the sword will and shuttled forward. They collided with the balls of divine light. The sharp sword will actually pierced through the divine light. While it disintegrated Chongqing's attack, it still went toward Chongqing himself. The elders of the 9 clans opened their eyes wide. Both sides hadn't opened their heavenly wheels. It was the first time they fought, and Qin Hao already had the upper hand? The juniors of the 9 clans were also in disbelief. They all knew how powerful Chongqing was. Therefore, it showed that Qin Hao was extraordinary. His sword will is sharp, vigorous, and continuous. It seems mottled, but it is also indestructible and capable of moving in multiple directions. From this, one can see that this boy has experienced countless fierce battles. God Lord Chonghua evaluated. Only death and blood could temper a mottled sword will to such perfection. He truly has suffered many hardships. Yu Shintian nodded. After leaving the sword world with Xiaohan, he had sent people to investigate Qin Hao's situation and learned many things. Can a clear stream converge into a sea? Chongqing's Tao will had been broken, but he didn't panic in the slightest. He opened his folding fan and gently waved it. As he waved his hand, the clear stream of water wrapped around the white fan and swung it forward. Whoosh! The water was translucent and crystalline, but it also seemed like a sticky rubber tree sap. The sword chi immediately stopped when it entered the water and rapidly melted away. Bzzz. The water rolled and turned into waves, like a huge roaring mouth of the sea. It turned into a huge water monster and rushed towards Qin Hao. Qin Hao gathered his palm into a fire. The dark red lotus tyrannical fire was like the swaying devil flame of the 9 nether ghost domain. He flicked his finger and the fireball in his palm fell into the huge mouth of the water monster. With a boom, the fire burned like a prairie. The water evaporated in the light of the fire, instantly turning the entire training ground into a purgatory. The ground was covered in blood-red flames that swept all the way to Chongqing's feet. Chongqing lowered his head and saw the tongues of fire coiling toward his legs. He frowned as he sensed the powerful devouring power of the flames. A clear stream can no longer converge into a sea, Qin Hao said with a smile. He flicked his sword finger upwards and layers of sword light flew out from the flames on the ground. They all condensed into blood-red demonic swords and arranged themselves in the void, forming an inverted and lofty sword mountain. What powerful sword energy! Xiaoya's eyes were filled with shock. There's a formation hidden in this sword. Zheng Huan's face was bitter. He sighed that his defeat was justified. His divine path was not at the same level as Qin Hao's. Moreover, there were signs that Qin Hao's Tao will was the same as young master's. It was all-encompassing and well-versed in formations. It was not a good thing to cultivate multiple divine paths. However, if one could cultivate all kinds of divine paths to a certain level, it would be very terrifying. Qin Hao was obviously such a freak. This fire, it's not simple. The second elder of the Moon Flow clan stopped eating. He secretly glanced at Yu Shangqing. Yu Shangqing and Mochizuki were from the Blazing Moon lineage. Their divine fire was very powerful. However, compared to the demonic fire released by Qin Hao, Mochizuki's blazing divine fire seemed to be unable to suppress it. You're making me admire you more and more. Young Master Qing was not surprised. Instead, he was delighted. Qin Hao was indeed a qualified opponent. He deserved to use his true strength. Buzz. Magnificent light of Zhonghua bloomed, and a holy qi heavenly wheel appeared on Zhongqing's body. 7 gold-plated divine runes surrounded him, shining with dazzling golden light. With the heavenly wheel attached to him, Zhongqing was in the Red Lotus Overlord fire. He didn't feel the pain of being burned at all, as if nothing had happened. He stepped forward and waved his white fan again. Boom! Monstrous waves of fire rolled up. As Chongqing waved his hand, a red blanket was lifted from the ground of the dojo. The fire of the Red Lotus overbearing fire attacked Qin Hao. The descendant of the immortal king is indeed powerful, Qin Hao said to himself. Young Master Chongqing's move was enough to be on par with Jun Mo. However, Chongqing's cultivation surpassed Jun Mo's. In fact, he was stronger than Jun Mo. However, Qin Hao was no longer the same as before. He released his heavenly wheel of the great Tao. White, gray, red, earthen yellow. 7 divine veins circled around the edges of the heavenly wheel. The colors were mottled, but as they circled around, the divine might exuded by Qin Hao was even more intimidating. Just how many types of divine power has he formed? God Lord Yuelyo's face twitched. It should be all 7 types of divine power. God Lord Chonghua carefully sensed the elemental energies exuded by Qin Hao's divine veins. 4 of them were suffused with the death energy of the netherworld. It seemed that he had obtained them from cultivating in the ancient underworld. Someone actually dared to go to such a place? This brat. Yueshan Tian gave a rare smile as he slapped his armrest. It was not easy to form 7 divine veins in 1,000 years, and cultivating 7 types of divine power was even more difficult. In the past, if someone had dared to say such things in front of him, he would have sent them flying with a single slap. But now, Qin Hao had proven to Yueshan Tian that there were no absolutes in the world. What seemed impossible was actually possible. In the following battle, my son will probably have a very hard time. Heavens, allow me to say one more thing. The Paragon Pill race truly is not as glorious as the era of the gods. Even though it has been reduced to a third-rate god race, Qin Hao's divine origin still contains Xiantian energy. In terms of background, he is actually not low, God Lord Chonghua said. You want to say that we should acknowledge him? As Yueshan Tian spoke, he secretly observed Xiao Han's expression. His granddaughter seemed to be very nervous. We should acknowledge him, God Lord Chonghua said. A perfect heavenly wheel, 7 divine veins, and someone on the verge of breaking through to the supreme god level. This was very rare, and if Qin Hao had awakened the primordial Tao will of the Paragon Pill race, it would be even rarer. He would definitely be worthy of being the son-in-law of the Yuelu race. Let's see how this brat performs. Yueshan Tian's face was still stern and inflexible, like a stubborn rock that could not be erased after 10,000 years in a river. Chapter 2283. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The red lotus demonic flame swept up and flew towards Qin Hao. Zhongqing released his perfect celestial wheel. His power of the Great Path was so strong that he could control the will of others to counterattack. Qin Hao looked serious. He released his celestial wheel at the same time, and the 7 meridian divine patterns surrounded him. He had to be careful when facing an opponent like Zhongqing. Boom! Qin Hao held his palms up high as he circulated the art of endless samsara in his body. His palms glowed with a purple divine light, which vaguely took the shape of a furnace. Qin Hao's palms glowed with a purple divine light. As the blood flames approached him, they were all absorbed into the furnace. The furnace's shadow suddenly exploded with a layer of eerie dark red light. It looked extremely horrifying. Go! Qin Hao's fist charged forward and the furnace exploded. The red lotus will of the Great Path was infused into the force of the punch, but a dragon's roar was heard. A divine dragon burning with bloody flames flew with the force of the punch, roaring and biting at Zhongqing. Zhongqing glanced at the mountain of swords above his head. The towering sword mountain was ready to attack. Tens of thousands of swords were buzzing and would pierce down at any time. He smiled faintly. Light and darkness intertwine. My heart is clear. All the laws of the universe will not disappear unless I am the one. The divine light rippled with Zhongqing's body and circles of halos appeared under his feet. His steps were like an elegant dance. As he opened the folding fan in his hand for the second time, he covered his face. Suddenly, the shadow of a celestial mountain rose above his body. It grew taller and taller. Its appearance was very similar to the entire Chonghua 99 levels of heaven. The celestial mountain was filled with an endless ancient aura. Roar! The divine dragon roared and flew up. It crashed into the shadow of the celestial mountain. Suddenly, the dragon's shape collapsed and scattered into countless red lotus flames, shooting in all directions. Qin Hao looked up and pointed his sword downwards. His sword will resonated with the 10,000 swords celestial mountain. In an instant, the inverted sword range fell straight down. Tens of thousands of swords shot out at the same time and pressed down on Zhongqing's head. However, because of the protection of the celestial mountain, the sword formation did not achieve the effect that Qin Hao expected. Gotcha! The 2 mountains collided. One was upside down while the other stood proudly, and they pressed against each other. The friction between the two mountains caused an expanse of extremely intense divine radiance to arise. This scene caused the geniuses of the 9 clans that were spectating to cheer endlessly, and they were extremely shocked in their hearts. Young Emperor Qing at the 98th level is indeed peerless. Zhan Wu praised him, and Lu nodded his head. Compared to the other members of the 9 clans, Zhong Qing's reaction to the situation and his reaction to the opponent's moves was decisive and quick. I don't think it's because of experience, but because of his innate fighting talent. Like the rest of the 9 families, Zhong Qing rarely left the Zhonghua God realm, and the number of times he fought was limited. His own experience was also very shallow. But even so, he was still able to grasp the overall situation and sense the minute details. This was very terrifying. Break! Qin Hao shouted. The 7 meridians on his Tianluan burst with dazzling divine radiance at the same time. His sword intent grew stronger as his divine intent grew stronger. His sword finger suddenly pressed down, and the sword mountain that was hanging upside down in the void condensed into a divine radiance that descended from the heavens. It sank into the celestial mountain inch by inch and tore it apart. Following a loud crash, the celestial mountain finally couldn't withstand it anymore. The divine radiance shattered, and the 10,000 swords pierced through it. Young Emperor! Young Emperor! In the spectator seats, Xiao He, Goddess Xiao Ye, Zheng Huan, and the others were all shocked. Then, everyone saw a figure flying out from the 10,000 swords and hovering in the air. Zhong Qing's clothes were torn apart by the sword qi, but he was perfectly fine, and his divine intent didn't show any signs of weakening either. Exquisite sword art, filled with murderous intent. Your sword should have been infused with spatial godly energy, right? Zhong Qing lowered his head and looked at the few holes on his clothes. He revealed a helpless expression. Young Emperor has good eyesight. Continue. Qin Hao pulled his palms together, and a blood-red spear image condensed from the red lotus tyrannical flame, transforming into a flaming divine spear. Qin Hao's body rose into the air, and as the spear trembled, he thrust it straight at Zhong Qing's throat. This brat. God Lord Zhonghua smiled. The Tao of fire, the Tao of sword, the Tao of space, and now the Tao of the spear. He really was omnipotent. Yushin Tian raised a hand and stroked his white beard, a hint of admiration flashing through his eyes. When Zhong Qing saw the spear image coming at him, his upper body leaned back slightly, and his body drifted backward. He waved the folding fan in his hand, thinking about how to block Qin Hao's spear and how to break through it. But at this moment, an icy intent that seemed to be 10,000 years old swept over his body. His hand movements suddenly slowed down, and he felt his body stiffen. What kind of Tao intent was this? Spear intent? No. It came with the spear intent, but it didn't belong to the spear intent, nor was it the Tao of ice. It was killing intent. Intense and pure killing intent. Zhong Qing's face revealed a hint of shock, and he coldly snorted. The 7 meridians on his heavenly wheel of the great Tao began to circulate in reverse, and he forcefully broke free of the stiffness. And at this moment, Qin Hao's spear arrived, and as a strand of hair drifted down from Zhong Qing's face, the upper echelon members of the 9 races all cried out in alarm. How dangerous! Zhong Qing vigorously shook his folding fan, striking the spearhead and knocking Qin Hao's spear off course. Without realizing it, a small amount of sweat had seeped out of his forehead. The Tao of slaughter, Qin Hao explained. His eyes were exceptionally cold. His entire being seemed to be devoid of emotions, like a cold-blooded god of slaughter. It was not that he really wanted to kill Zhong Qing, but it was just how the divine path of slaughter was. When the power of the will of Tao was released, just the cold killing intent alone was enough to make people feel extremely uncomfortable. You really don't want a son-in-law like this? God Lord Zhonghua looked at Yushin Tian. the Tao of the sword, the great Tao of space, the Tao of slaughter, the Tao of fire, the Tao of the spear, and perhaps even more. After exchanging blows several times, there were very few people in the great desolate era who could leave several holes in his son's clothes and almost kill Zhong Qing with a single spear strike. Zhong Hua has no daughter of the first wife, right? Yushin Tian stroked his beard, his face unperturbed. Had Zhong Hua taken a liking to that brat and wanted to poach him into the Zhong Hua race? Alas, he only had one son. It's fine. I can use the Tao spirit art to give birth to another daughter, and after 1,000 years, 100 years is fine too. An old man with a young wife is quite fresh. God Lord Zhong Hua's smile grew stranger and stranger. God Lord Yuelu looked at the two in surprise. If he didn't know that Zhong Hua and Yushin Tian were both true exalts, he would never have imagined that they could say something so demeaning. At this moment, as Qin Hao unleashed a completely different Tao will and fused the massacre Tao into his spear technique, Qing Shaojun was caught off guard. Their figures chased each other in the sky above the dojo. Beams of spear gleams flew, and Qing Shaojun, who was at the 98th tier, was gradually losing ground. Of the four god Daos of the underworld, the Slaughter Dao was extremely special in the Great Desolate Era. Normally speaking, it was very difficult for people to get used to it for the first time, and Zhong Qing was no exception. Seeing Qing Shaojun retreat again and again, the juniors of the 9 races looked up and sighed. Truly, there was always a taller mountain, and there would always be someone stronger than the strong. Zhong Qing's divine Tao strength was already very frightening, but today, he encountered someone even sharper than him. However, the juniors of the 9 races understood that although Zhong Qing seemed to be in a sorry state, he was still in the process of getting used to it. After all, he had yet to use his Xiantian power. This was the true terror of the Zhong Hua race, and also the greatest capital that allowed an immortal king to stand tall in the Great Desolate Era. Although that was the case, seeing Zhongqing being suppressed by Qin Hao, the upper echelons of the 9 families still did not feel good. In their opinion, Zhongqing should be suppressing Qin Hao. The murderous nature of this Tao intent can affect people's souls, and weaken the opponent's willpower and mentality of resistance. Zhongqing waved the white fan in his hand and activated his wheel-light divine power, covering himself tightly to prevent Qin Hao's murderous intent from invading. Indeed, so Shaojun, you must be careful. Qin Hao did not stop attacking. Each of the 4 god Daos of the underworld had its own unique profoundness. In fact, they were essentially no different from other great Daos. But because they were rare, they were more unique. With a sweep of the flaming divine spear, one of the 7 god meridians on Qin Hao's wheel-light divine spear let out a ghastly white god meridian that was wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. It turned into several skulls and swept towards Zhongqing's protective divine light. Zhongqing did not think much of it at first. However, when his protective divine light came into contact with the light foam of the exploded skulls, a gust of chilly wind blew in his face, and a huge amount of dark power descended on him. At this moment, Zhongqing felt that the world around him seemed to have stopped. Many images involuntarily appeared in his mind. He was born with a delicate body and had never lacked anything since he was a child. Although the images in his mind were not terrifying, they were still things that made him uncomfortable when he was young. Therefore, Zhongqing was still affected. 1 spear. 7 kills. Seizing the opportunity, Qin Hao decisively took advantage of Zhongqing's demonic repellent to use his powerful unique skill. He thrust out his spear, and 7 rays of sharp light shot out. It was as if 7 spearheads were stabbing at Zhongqing at the same time. Shaojun, be careful. Someone outside the arena screamed. Many of the elders of the 9 clans stood up with a look of horror on their faces. They looked at the 7 rays of spear light shooting towards Zhongqing. In a blur, they felt that the 7 rays of spear light were illusory, but they also felt as if they were real. It was hard to tell at the moment. Is Zhong Qing's strength limited to this? Qin Hao narrowed his eyes. As he thrust out his spear, he stared at Zhong Qing's lifeless eyes, paying attention to the changes in his emotions. Qin Hao would be disappointed if Zhong Qing, who was at the 98th level, could not withstand the effects of the ghost's resentment curse and the spear of 7 kills. Whoosh! The 7 rays of spear light were reflected in Zhong Qing's eyes. Strangely, Zhong Qing's lifeless eyes recovered instantly, as if an extremely powerful force had woken him up. Along with this, an extremely small ray of light suddenly flew out from his white fan. It looked like a golden shadow, but its shape could not be seen clearly. Even with Qin Hao's eyesight, he could not see it clearly. Then, the spear of 7 kills disappeared. Even the demonic flame blood spear in Qin Hao's hand disappeared without a trace under the influence of an unknown Tao will. When his spear stabbed in front of Zhong Qing, his hands were empty. He could only stare blankly at Zhong Qing. It was especially awkward for a moment. That golden shadow, what is it? Qin Hao did not know, but at that moment, he felt a strong sense of danger. It was the same feeling he had when he met Jun Mo at the floating glass field. His heart trembled uncontrollably, and his body trembled faintly. Finally, he took it out? Yu Shangqing slowly sat back down. Just now, he was also shocked. He thought that Zhong Qing would lose in front of Qin Hao's spear. The primordial power of the Zhonghua celestial clan. Next, it will be even more interesting. Yu Yuanjin put his hands in his sleeve. From this moment on, the battle could be considered a real contest. But he did not know how Qin Hao would face Zhong Qing, who was serious. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.